Chapter 122. I'm really grateful to you, young man. Looking at the check for $60,000 in Zhang Hai's hand, the principal of the town's elementary school held Zhang Hai's hand tightly with trembling hands and said gratefully, You're welcome. Zhang Hai really wanted to say that he was just trying to avoid paying taxes, but he really couldn't say that out loud. Before coming here this morning, Zhang Hai specially called his lawyer, Moses Adams. He asked about this matter. Although it was just a small donation of tens of thousands of dollars, Zhang Hai was a big client, so Moses Adams confirmed it as soon as he received Zhang Hai's call. The town's elementary school's donation collection was indeed within the scope of tax deductions, but it couldn't deduct too much. It could only deduct 80% of the tax. In other words, the donation of $60,000 could offset the tax of $48,000. Although it was still a waste of $12,000, at least it would leave a good reputation. Zhang Hai was such a person. Otherwise, he wouldn't do it. If he wanted to do it, he would do his best. So after hesitating for a while, he felt that what Ai Dehua said made sense. He was now in the United States. With the upgrade of the scales on his body, he couldn't easily leave here. Under such circumstances, instead of being stingy and building a car behind closed doors, it was better to build a good relationship with the people here. He didn't expect them to help him, but at least they wouldn't drag him down. It was precisely because of this that Zhang Hai was here today. In fact, he wasn't willing to part with $60,000. No, we still have to thank you. We're going to name the new stadium after you. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the principal didn't think so and still said excitedly. Upon hearing that he was going to name the stadium after himself, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he felt a little embarrassed. He suddenly felt that $60,000 was a little too little. Someone else was going to name a stadium after him. If this happened in China, it wouldn't be so easy. However, Zhang Hai, who was unwilling to fork out more money, could only laugh dryly. On the other hand, the principal and the teachers beside him were obviously still in a state of excitement. After all, the money problem that troubled them the most had been solved. The rest of the matter was much simpler. As long as a construction team was hired, the reconstruction of the 3 rooms and the gymnasium would be done very quickly. After all, the houses here were all bungalows. In addition to the shoddy construction in the United States, there were not many houses. The foundation was laid very well, so the foundation didn't need to be moved. They only needed to remove the main body of the house and rebuild it. Although it was winter now, it wasn't a problem for the construction team. The townspeople were still very concerned about this town's primary school. After all, it was a public primary school. Some students whose family conditions were not too good still hoped to study here. Therefore, as long as they didn't spend money and had time, they would come here to help. Because of this, there were still many people in town. It was also because of this that they almost didn't include the cost of labor. Otherwise, a gymnasium and 3 rooms couldn't be built with only $60,000 to $70,000. This money was enough to buy materials, but it was far from enough to pay for labor. However, Zhang Hai had never done engineering before, so he didn't understand this. Now, he was a little embarrassed by these people's praises. Looking at Zhang Hai's embarrassed expression, Xueqi, who was beside him, reacted first. As a teacher, although she couldn't say that she had seen countless people, she could clearly see that these praises didn't make Zhang Hai feel very comfortable. Instead, it made him feel a little uncomfortable. This also showed that Zhang Hai's personality was a little introverted. Perhaps he would be very open in front of familiar people, but at least now, he was a little embarrassed. The reason why Zhang Hai came to donate money could be said to be inseparable from her. Now that Zhang Hai felt uncomfortable, she felt that it was also her responsibility, so she thought for a moment and took the initiative to speak up. This time, I'm really grateful to you. We don't have anything to say to you. It's also noon now. How about I treat you to lunch? Hearing Xueqi's words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. He originally planned to leave after donating the money, but he didn't expect that a beautiful woman would invite him to lunch now. What was going on? Hearing Xueqi's words, the old principal also reacted and said immediately, Yes, look at me. I'm too busy talking. It's already noon. I guess Mr. Zhang is also hungry. Sandy, accompany Mr. Zhang to lunch. The money spent is on me. Forget it, principal. You don't have any money now. He was brought here by me, so naturally, I have to treat him. I don't know if Mr. Jiang will do me the honor? Hearing what the old principal said, Xueqi Clive immediately said to him, then turned her head and said to Zhang Hai. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai smiled a little awkwardly, although he didn't want to trouble others. But since the conversation had already reached this point, it was not appropriate for him to say anything. He could only nod to show that he agreed. Seeing that Zhang Hai agreed, Xueqi Clive also smiled, then took Zhang Hai out of the school again. In the United States, although almost every student after graduating from high school had a driver's license, because it also counted as credits. But not everyone had a car, especially some girls. Most boys liked cars, so when they graduated from high school, they would more or less beg their parents to buy them a car to show off. But girls were different. Sometimes they only learned to drive for credits. For example, Xueqi Clive didn't have a car. Fortunately, her home was not far from the school. It only took her 10 minutes to walk there every day, so it was convenient. But today, she wanted to treat Zhang Hai to a meal. There weren't any good restaurants near the school, so they had to take Zhang Hai's car to go to town. After the two of them greeted the guard, they got into Zhang Hai's car. From here, it could be seen that Zhang Hai was really dull. Usually, in this kind of situation, the man would be very gentlemanly and open the door for the woman, but Zhang Hai just got into the driver's seat. This made Xueqi Clive look at Zhang Hai with some confusion. This Zhang Hai is a bit interesting. Seeing that Xueqi Clive had already gotten into the car, Zhang Hai smiled and asked her, "Where are we going?" Hearing Zhang Hai's question, Xueqi Clive thought for a while and decided to take Zhang Hai to eat a good meal. "Let's go eat steak. I know a French restaurant in town that is quite good." Hearing that they were going to eat French food, Zhang Hai calculated in his mind. French food was known as the most gorgeous and also the most expensive food in the world. Zhang Hai had wanted to eat there before he became rich, but after he became rich, he really didn't eat it. This was because French food was famous for its foie gras and snails, but Zhang Hai didn't like to eat either. As for steak, the French preferred to use the outer rib to make steak. For Zhang Hai, the outer rib was a bit fat. Compared to outer rib, he preferred to eat tenderloin, eye meat, and upper rib, which were all relatively thin. As for the marbled pattern, the pattern was indeed fat, but this thing almost melted after being roasted. When it entered the mouth, other than the fresh taste of butter, it didn't have the taste of fat. Moreover, even if he wanted to eat steak, he wouldn't eat it at home. Was it so easy to eat special grade A beef outside? But now, since it was Sandy who said it, Zhang Hai couldn't refuse. After all, the two were not very familiar with each other, so he just followed the host's wishes. So after asking for the way, Zhang Hai drove to the Western restaurant. On the way, the two were obviously embarrassed, because Zhang Hai was a taciturn person. He wouldn't take the initiative to find a topic to chat with a girl, otherwise, he wouldn't be as lonely as he was now. Xueqi Clive, although an American girl, was a girl after all. Moreover, she and Zhang Hai weren't very familiar with each other. Today was only the third time they met, so there was nothing to talk about. For a while, the atmosphere in the car was very strange, but fortunately, Zhang Hai's driving skills were still very good after being optimized. The car was fast and stable. Before the atmosphere in the car dropped below the freezing point, he had already driven the car. After parking the car in front of the hotel, Zhang Hai and Xueqi Clive walked into the Western restaurant together. "Sir, madam. Hello, do you want to eat? Do you have a reservation?" Although the Western restaurant in the town was certainly not comparable to the main city like Boston, the quality of the staff here was much better than the same type of restaurant. As soon as Zhang Hai and Xueqi Clive walked in, a waiter took the initiative to greet them and said to them with a smile, "We want to eat, but we don't have a reservation." Hearing the waiter's words, Sandy also took the initiative to say. In this season, no restaurant was full, so after hearing that Sandy and Zhang Hai didn't have a reservation, the waiter didn't say anything like sorry, but directly led the two to a table for two. After the two sat down, a handsome white guy also came over with a menu and asked the two what they wanted to eat. "Take a look first, today is my treat, so you don't have to be polite, just order whatever you want to eat." She took the initiative to hand over the menu to Zhang Hai and said with a smile. Zhang Hai didn't stand on ceremony, he directly took the menu and looked at it. But when he looked at it, He was a little confused, because he didn't know what was written on it. Western restaurants like this were divided into two sections. One was the single order section, which was much easier to say. You could order whatever you wanted to eat, and 90% of these were main dishes. The other section was the set meal, which mainly consisted of main dishes. It was divided into set A, set B, and set C. There was a lot of variety, and it was written in both English and French. Just looking at it made Zhang Hai's teeth hurt. It will be on the shelves tomorrow morning. The first chapter will be promoted, and the first chapter will be promoted. After all, it's in the middle of the month. Starting from the second day, there will be a minimum of 4 chapters a day. If the new subscriptions are read over 3,000 a day, 2 chapters will be updated over 4,000, and 3 chapters will be updated over 5,000. There is no limit. Please support Little Faye. Thank you. Chapter 123. I really don't understand. It's up to you. To be honest, this is my first time eating French food. I don't know what's so good about it. If he understood, he understood. If he didn't understand, he didn't understand. Zhang Hai's biggest advantage was his confidence. In front of women, if he didn't understand, then he wouldn't pretend. So after looking around, he smacked his teeth. He handed the menu back and said with a helpless expression. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi Clive was stunned for a moment, because in her opinion, a rich person like Zhang Hai should pursue quality of life, so she brought Zhang Hai to eat French food. But unexpectedly, Zhang Hai hasn't eaten French food before, which made Sandy a little dumbfounded. Well, I hope you will like what we order later. Give us 2 sets. After taking a look at the menu, Xueqi Clive looked at it and said, Is it set A, set B, or set C? Hearing Sandy's words, the waiter asked. Set B. After looking at the menu, Xueqi Clive thought for a moment and said, The so-called set A, B, and C are also particular here. Set A is commonly known as the traditional set, with a total of 13 dishes. The first is frozen appetizer, the second is soup, the third is hot appetizer, the fourth is fish, the fifth is main dish, the sixth is hot appetizer, the seventh is cold appetizer, the eighth is snow, the ninth is barbecue or salad, the 10th is vegetables, the 11th is dessert, the 12th is salty, and the 13th is dessert. Generally speaking, this is a very formal banquet. Only then will there be so many rules. Obviously, Zhang Hai didn't have the patience to wait for him to serve 13 dishes. It was precisely because of this that Xanthi ordered the B-set meal. The B-set meal consisted of 5 dishes, a frozen appetizer, a soup, a hot appetizer, a main dish, and a dessert. In addition, there was also the C-set meal, which consisted of an appetizer, a main dish, and a dessert. For the frozen appetizer, Xueqi Clive chose tuna salad. Of course, it is estimated that each person can only get a few slices of tuna. For the soup, she chose cream of mushroom soup. After all, this is the most famous French dish. For the hot appetizer, she chose French stewed potatoes, and for the dessert, she wants strawberry crepe. But when it comes to the main dish, she hesitated. What do you recommend today? Sandy is not in a hurry. After hesitating for a long time, she still can't make a decision, so she raised her head and asked the waiter in front of her. Today's recommendation is red wine stewed beef. We just received the new Burgundy red wine from France this morning. You too can try it. Hearing the waiter's words, Xueqi Clive nodded with satisfaction. That's it. You can serve it now. After she confirmed that she wants this, the waiter also bowed respectfully and went to tell the kitchen to serve the dishes. After he left, Zhang Hai looked at Xueqi Clive. It seems like you come here often. Zhang Hai looked around and said to Xueqi Clive, Well, I come here often because a long time ago, my father was a chef here. I often came here when I was young to play, but since my father stopped working here, I have come here about 4 or 5 times. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi Clive smiled and said. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai can't help but nod. A French chef seems to be very powerful. What about you? You are rich. Haven't you eaten French food? It shouldn't be. After answering Zhang Hai's question, Xueqi Clive asked Zhang Hai. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai's face was a little shy. Me? Don't laugh when I tell you. I used to be born in a poor family. Later, I got rich by chance and came to the United States to buy the Green Forest Manor. Deep in my bones, I still have the mindset of a small farmer. So, you can see that I almost never interact with the people in the town. I just stay at home. To tell you the truth, you might not believe it. Now, other than knowing what the mayor, the police chief, and a few salespeople in the supermarket in the town look like, I only know my subordinates. I don't know anyone in the town. I usually come to town to eat, and I often eat at the Italian restaurant on the west side of town. Their fried crab meat is very delicious. Looking at Xueqi Clive, Zhang Hai slowly said, "Wow, you're really different from the rich people I know." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi Clive was a little surprised. Originally, she thought that Zhang Hai didn't interact with the people in town because he didn't like the people in town. He might have his own circle of friends, but now it seems that the shy boy in front of her is more like an otaku. I didn't expect you to like the food in that Italian restaurant. I also like it. Have you tried the lobster spaghetti there? Since they started talking, Xueqi Clive also casually talked to Zhang Hai. Yes, the taste is not bad. The milky smell is very strong, but for me, it is a bit fishy. Other than that, everything else is fine. Hearing Xueqi Clive's words, Zhang Hai also immediately said, "How can lobsters not be fishy? Also, I heard that the Green Forest also has a fish farm. As the owner of a fish farm, you don't eat fishy lobsters?" Looking at Zhang Hai, Xueqi Clive said half-jokingly, "Ah, I eat it. That's why I said it was a bit fishy. Not very fishy." Zhang Hai blinked and said innocently, "Okay, you are playing a language trap with a teacher? Do you really think this is good?" Looking at Zhang Hai, Sandy couldn't help but laugh. Looking at Sandy's appearance, Zhang Hai also chuckled and then continued. To be honest, this should be the first time in 2 years that Zhang Hai said so much to a girl. Although Zhang Hai is a bit shy and introverted, he is a very cheerful person. But ever since his parents passed away, he more or less felt inferior when interacting with strangers. Therefore, his cheerful side would only face people he is familiar with, not strangers. He and Sandy should be considered strangers, but he had no choice. He hadn't chatted with people of his age for a long time. In the manor, there were only 2 people of his age. Halamon couldn't chat with him. Although Bale would chat with him sometimes, he had to work most of the time. The only people who could chat with him and have free time to chat with him were Philip's 2 sons. But they just came here to celebrate the festival. After Christmas and New Year, they would leave. Once they left, Zhang Hai would have nothing to do. After holding back for a few days, today, when he heard Sandy aroused his desire to talk, he also began to talk non-stop. As for Sandy, she also liked to listen to Zhang Hai, because she thought Zhang Hai's words were very interesting and simple. He didn't sound like those rich playboys who bragged all day long. Although he was rich, his words were very close to life. This made Xanthi have a good impression of Zhang Hai. In addition, Zhang Hai had helped her school solve their money problem, so she was grateful to him. In addition to this good impression of him, further development could only be discussed in the future. But at least for now, she was very willing to chat with Zhang Hai. Teachers were actually very talkative, so the more they talked, the happier they were. Even after the dishes were served, the 2 of them were still eating and chatting. In fact, this was somewhat impolite in Western countries. It was just like the request of the elderly in China. They did not talk while eating and sleeping. However, the 2 of them were of the same age, so no one cared about this. As the 2 talked, Xueqi, Clive realized that Zhang Hai was really an interesting man. Maybe it was because he didn't work outside after leaving school, but sometimes Zhang Hai seemed a bit naive. He didn't talk and do things like an adult, but more like a big boy. Listening to his complaints, listening to his jokes, and listening to him showing off the fish and beef in his manner, Xueqi, Clive suddenly felt that this guy was really interesting. He wasn't as pretentious as she thought, nor was he crazy. Instead, he was a bit lively. Whether this kind of person was suitable to be a boyfriend was another matter, but it wouldn't be bad if he could be a friend. The beef here is cooked well, but the beef itself is far inferior to mine. When you have time, you can come to my place to play. Let's not talk about other things, but I have more than enough special grade A beef. At this time, Zhang Hai didn't notice any changes in Xueqi Clive. He only used his fork to stab at the burgundy red wine stewed beef in front of him as he spoke to her with a smile. Okay, then I want to try the taste of special grade A beef. I haven't had it in a while. Let me tell you, the last time I had special grade A beef, my dad was still the head chef here. I snuck into the kitchen to eat it. It's been many years. At that time, I only ate a small piece, but I was fascinated by it. But since you said you have enough, then I'll go eat it tomorrow, Xueqi, Clive said with a smile when she saw Zhang Hai talking about the beef in his manor. Okay, no problem. You're welcome any time. But my manor is now completely white, and there's nothing to play with. It's freezing to go out to sea by boat. After a while, when the cattle are released and we can go out to sea, then there'll be a lot of fun. Zhang Hai wasn't bragging. The special grade beef in his manor was indeed enough. In his view, Xueqi, Clive was now his friend, so it wasn't a big deal to come over and eat beef. The only pity was that there was nothing to play with now. This doesn't matter, we can eat at night. Oh right, I heard you say that you haven't toured Boston yet. How about this, in order to thank you for treating me to beef tomorrow night, I'll be your guide tomorrow morning and take you around Boston. Today's second update, continuously delivered. Please support me. Chapter 124. Boss, you're back. With the roar of the car, Zhang Hai's F-650 also stopped in the parking lot in front of his villa. When Zhang Hai got out of the car, Tommy Charles and the others in the distance had already seen him and walked over with smiles on their faces. Seeing these people take the initiative to greet him, Zhang Hai immediately smiled. Well, I'm back. How are you guys? Have you settled down? Looking at the originally dark small villas in the distance at this time, Zhang Hai also smiled and said to them, well, we've settled down. Boss, I have to admit that the hardware here is really good. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Tommy Charles couldn't help but speak first. To be honest, after coming here, he realized how wise his decision was. Although Zhang Hai didn't give him a lot of money, and there was no clear ratio of bonuses, he still didn't give Zhang Hai enough money. Everything was according to Zhang Hai's mood, but the hardware here was really good. Originally, these people thought that when Zhang Hai said that he would provide food and accommodation, they would live in the kind of workers' room. As for food, except for the fish, the so-called beef was enough to eat some usable grade beef that retailed at $3 a pound. Originally, in their hearts, they planned to do so. After all, they were here to make money, not to take a vacation. As long as Zhang Hai paid them on time, there would be no problem. However, when they followed Ai Dehua to Zhang Hai's manor, they were dumbfounded. They were really living in the legendary small detached villas, not the ordinary workers' room. Everyone had their own privacy. In the small villa, there was everything. Although it was not big, it was not a problem for a family to live in. As for the living conditions, when they first arrived, they were already confused. Satisfied, very satisfied, very satisfied. If such a small villa was rented outside, the annual rent would be a few $1,000s. In Zhang Hai's place, however, they could live here for free, which was equivalent to giving them an extra $100 a week. What was there to be dissatisfied about? After putting everything away, they followed Ai Dehua to the warehouse to get what they wanted to eat. As soon as they arrived at the warehouse, they realized that Zhang Hai was really too generous. The imagined small amount of usable beef did not exist at all. In Zhang Hai's place, the superior and specially selected beef was kept by Luo Binci. Naturally, this level of beef was prepared for Zhang Hai. Other than the special grade and the special grade, Robbins and the others could eat them. In other words, the meat they ate was all the best and standard. Not to mention usable meat, even commercial-grade beef was fed to the dogs. Zhang Hai had so many cattle dogs at home, and there were 2 big dogs. Zhang Hai had picked up Xiao Bai's Sea Eagle. These guys naturally ate beef, except for Xiao Bai and Zhang Hai, who ate the superior and specially selected grade beef. The other dogs ate commercial-grade beef. As for Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai, they mainly ate standard beef. Of course, sometimes they would eat some good beef that Zhang Hai rewarded them. This beef was usually not eaten in some American families, but in Zhang Hai's manor, it was fed to the dogs. One had to admit that sometimes Zhang Hai was really a spendthrift. But for these fishermen, when they received the food, they were even more shocked. Inside Zhang Hai's manor, there was no ration of food. Instead, they could eat whatever they wanted. If you want to eat fish, then take fish. If you want to eat beef, then take beef. If you want to eat whatever you want, then take whatever you want, as long as you don't waste it. And most importantly, you can't sell it outside. Aside from that, Zhang Hai didn't have any requirements for them. So when these fishermen came home with more than 10 pounds of beef, their wives couldn't help but feel numb. In the past, they could only eat the beef during the New Year's festivals. Unexpectedly, it was taken back by their own men. It seemed that living in this manner was the best choice. It was precisely because of this that these fishermen were a little confused. As the saying goes, one's hand blinds one's eye. After everything was settled, a few new fishermen gathered together. They also gathered together to express their attitude. They must work hard for Zhang Hai. Otherwise, they would really be kicked out by Zhang Hai. They would not be able to find such benefits anywhere else. It's fine as long as you're satisfied. Work hard for me, and I won't treat you badly. Have a good rest today, and discuss with AI Dehua tomorrow about how to be on duty. You may have heard that when I went to sell fish a few days ago, I might have been targeted by others. If there are boats coming to my territory to steal fish, you'll have to put in some effort. Seeing that the fishermen were very satisfied, Zhang Hai also smiled. Then, he patted the arm of Eleanor Cece, who was silent beside him, and said to them earnestly, "Don't worry, if those bastards dare to come, I will let them have a taste of my old buddy's power." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Tommy Charles also said immediately. Zhang Hai knew that the old buddy they were talking about was the gun. These fishermen had the habit of carrying guns when they went out to sea. After all, the sea was different from land. If something happened, it would be troublesome. Then I will have to trouble you. Go back and rest quickly. Hearing their words and feeling their spirit, Zhang Hai also nodded with satisfaction. Recruiting people, other things were not too important. The most important thing was to have a state where they were willing to work hard for his career. At least, Zhang Hai was very satisfied with the current state of these people. Well, okay. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, everyone here nodded happily to Zhang Hai and then walked back to their rooms. As for Zhang Hai, he walked back to his villa. However, after returning, he did not go directly to the house. Instead, he went to the warehouse first. He remembered that he invited Shenty Clive to come over to eat beef tomorrow. He did not want to run out of beef by then. Fortunately, there is still beef. Walking into the warehouse's freezer, Zhang Hai saw a few large pieces of beef hanging in the air. These beef were left behind by robins and the others after they killed the cows. As far as the current situation was concerned, it was still in a very fresh state. Very good. Besides beef, is there anything else? This was the first time Zhang Hai invited a girl to his house for dinner. Even if his reaction was half a beat slower, he was still a little slow. He did not particularly understand what this meant. In fact, he did not think about it that way. The reason why he was here to see what else was in the house was entirely because of the genes of an otaku. If he wanted to treat someone to a meal, he would not treat them. If he wanted to treat someone to a meal, naturally, he would eat well, especially when the other party was a beauty. After checking the beef and confirming that it was superior grade, Zhang Hai looked at other things. But after looking at it, Zhang Hai couldn't help but frown. This was because the ingredients in his warehouse, in addition to the special grade beef, there were only some prawns and crabs left. After the lobsters were caught yesterday, they were eliminated by him and the people in the manor. The remaining prawns and crabs, to be honest, the people in the United States almost didn't eat crabs. They only ate the legs of crabs. They didn't have much interest in the hard-to-get meat, especially the fishermen. They didn't like prawns and crabs, which were more troublesome to eat. Therefore, the only person who liked to eat them here was Zhang Hai. But on the contrary, compared to prawns and crabs, lobsters are something they like to eat very much. These guys will also pick delicious things to eat. I'm the owner of a fishery. I treat a girl to a meal, but I don't even have lobsters. It's really embarrassing. Scratching his head, Zhang Hai muttered in a low voice. After thinking for a while, he felt that he should go to the sea tonight to catch a few. After learning that the sharks under the sea were not a threat, Zhang Hai's courage increased a lot. But thinking about it, the sky is dark outside, and the water is cold. If I go into the water to catch lobsters, ugh, I'm crazy. In fact, the best way was to let AI Dehua and the others bring back some lobsters when they patrol tomorrow. However, Chinese people, especially Chinese otakus, had a common problem. They didn't like to ask others to help them. There was no need to ask others to help them do things that they could do. In his opinion, he could do the lobsters himself, so he was a little uncomfortable to ask Ai Dehua for help. However, considering that it was cold and late at night, he still felt that he should trouble Ai Dehua. After returning to his room, Zhang Hai called Ai Dehua with the mentality of being rejected. However, when Ai Dehua heard that Zhang Hai wanted to treat a girl to a meal at home tomorrow, he naturally patted his chest and said that there was no problem. Not to mention lobsters, even if it was something else, he would find a way to get it. Moreover, although lobsters were rare on the nearby coast, after all, Zhang Hai's underwater water resources were extremely abundant. There was no shortage of lobsters. He only needed to make the fishing net deeper. Even if he couldn't catch lobsters that were too big, it wouldn't be a problem for him to catch about 5 kilograms of lobsters. 5 kilograms of lobsters would be good enough for him to treat others to a meal. Hearing Ai Dehua's words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he agreed. If he had some hesitation, then Zhang Hai would have to find a way to get it himself. It seems that Zhang Hai's position is still not right. He is the boss, not a worker. Sometimes, the mindset of a commoner is really the biggest obstacle to becoming a capitalist. With the idea of going to Boston tomorrow to play. Well, of course, he also had the idea of going out with Sandy. Zhang Hai quickly fell asleep on his big bed, but maybe because he was excited, he woke up at 6 o'clock the next morning. After washing his face and brushing his teeth, he saw that it was still early, so he went to exercise. When he came back, he received a text message from Xueqi Clive, asking if he had woken up. When Zhang Hai saw the text message, he quickly replied on his phone. This was the first time he texted a girl in a long time. The last time he texted a girl was to inform his wife that he was leaving. But in his heart, this kind of text message obviously didn't count. Chapter 125. Hey, sorry to keep you waiting. Xueqi Clive looked at the F-650 parked on the road. She walked out of the small villa behind her and smiled at Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai also opened the door and jumped out of the car. It's fine, I just arrived. Zhang Hai immediately waved his hand and said. He didn't care about the awkwardness of playing Plants vs. Zombies on his phone. His face was filled with a bright smile. At the same time, he looked at Xueqi Clive in front of him. He had to admit that Xueqi Clive was very beautiful today. Xueqi Clive was originally of mixed race. She had introduced herself before. Her father was a white man from the United States, and her mother was Venezuelan. Venezuela was the country that produced the most beautiful women in the world. Her mother was also very beautiful in Venezuela. However, women who were too beautiful sometimes couldn't be kept if they didn't have enough money. That was why she ran away with the boss of the Western restaurant where her father worked. Her father was disheartened and brought her back to his hometown, Boston. He became a chef and found her a stepmother. That stepmother was her current sister, Karma Cliff's mother. Zhang Hai originally thought it was strange. Although the two sisters looked similar, their hair and skin color were different. Today, Cindy Clive deliberately dressed up. Her long brown hair was pulled straight and buttoned. Because she inherited her father's genes, she was very tall, about 1.75 meters tall. She had a well-proportioned body, especially her two long legs. According to Zhang Hai's estimation, her legs were about 1 meters long. What she inherited from her mother was her skin texture and delicate facial features. Her skin was not as thick as that of a white person. Instead, it was as delicate as that of an Asian. Her facial features were also much more delicate than that of an orthodox white person. It made people feel very comfortable looking at her. Xueqi Clive looked at Zhang Hai's smile and said embarrassedly, "Okay, I didn't expect you to wake up so early. This weather is perfect for sleeping in. Haha, to apologize. I'll treat you to breakfast. Let's go." When she sent the message to Zhang Hai, she didn't know that Zhang Hai was here. She had just woken up. The primary school in the United States was a free-range model. It was more to stimulate the children's nature. It was more like an extension of kindergarten than a primary school. There weren't many cultural classes. What the fifth graders learned in China were what the second graders learned in the United States. The children didn't learn much, so naturally, they didn't have much homework. More homework, such as the kind of outdoor activities, watching the diary, and so on, the children's burden was lighter. Naturally, the teachers weren't too busy, not to mention that it was a holiday. If it weren't for the collapse of the school, teachers like Sandy wouldn't have to go to school. Now that Zhonghai had paid for it, she had nothing to do. Yesterday afternoon, the principal had already found someone to contact the materials and staff to prepare for the reconstruction. Although it was the coldest time in Boston, school would start in a few days. It was impossible for them to build it before school started, but they had to hurry up. Because of this, after dinner yesterday, Zhonghai sent her home, which was the villa behind her. Because these days, the school's problems had been pressing on her, making her very tired. She fell asleep and didn't wake up until 8 o'clock in the morning. When she woke up, she sent a message to Zhonghai, asking if Zhonghai had woken up. In the end, after Zhonghai said that he would be at her house around 8:30. But a woman, especially a beautiful woman, wouldn't go out so casually. When Zhonghai arrived at her house, she was still putting on makeup. So even though she saw Zhonghai's car, she couldn't just go down halfway. She could only bite the bullet and put on for another half an hour. As for asking Zhonghai to come in, she had considered it. But because she was single now, she lived here with her parents and her sister. If she suddenly asked a strange man to come into her house, what if her parents misunderstood? So after hesitating for a long time, she could only send a message to Zhonghai to tell him that she was still putting on makeup. In this regard, Zhonghai only curled his lips and had nothing to say. Fortunately, he wasn't stupid and didn't come out to wait. Instead, he sat in the driver's seat and played with his mobile phone. Time passed quickly. Thank you. Hearing that Xanthi wanted to treat him to breakfast, Zhonghai didn't refuse, but said with a smile. Then he got in the car first and opened the door for Xanthi. Although it was still not gentlemanly, Xanthi had long been used to it. In fact, she was quite comfortable with Zhonghai treating her like this. Where are we going now? After Xanthi got in the car and fastened her seatbelt, Zhonghai asked her. We are going to the town entrance now. There is a small Mexican restaurant that tastes very good. The burritos there are the best in town. Hearing Zhonghai's words, Xueqi Clive also said with a smile. Okay, you lead the way. Hearing Xanthi's words, Zhonghai also smiled, then turned the steering wheel and went to the place that Xueqi Clive said. Before leaving town, they found the small Mexican restaurant. When it comes to Mexican food, 9 out of 10 people will think of 2 things, burritos and chili. It turns out that the restaurant recommended by Xueqi Clive is really good. The signature burrito is Mexican beef burrito. The beef in this burrito is naturally not steak. After all, it only costs $5, so it is not expensive. Therefore, it is filled with beef stuffing and dough made with special seasoning. It has the taste of meat sauce and the fragrance of corn, but it is not greasy. The beef stuffing inside is matched with the most famous chili sauce in Mexico. It doesn't need to be too spicy, it needs to be spicy with a hint of sweetness and sourness. It is simple, but the taste is really good. This is the first time that Zhonghai has seen such delicious food. With a drink, Zhonghai ate 6 burritos in one breath before he was satisfied. Although this is not much, Zhonghai's big appetite also shocked Xueqi Clive. Wow, I didn't expect you to eat so much. After coming out of the burrito shop and returning to the car, Zhonghai was still thinking about the delicious food just now. Xueqi Clive looked at him in surprise. It's delicious, so I ate a little more. Hee, how are we going now? With a bright smile, Zhonghai asked Xueqi Clive. Hearing Zhonghai's words, Xueqi Clive also smiled, then pointed with her slender finger. Let's go to Boston first, that is our main goal today. Hearing her words, Zhonghai secretly slapped his forehead. Why am I so stupid? Didn't I say that we are going to Boston today? With an awkward smirk, Zhonghai started the car and headed for the city of Boston. After about an hour's drive, they entered Boston's territory, and under the command of Xueqi Clive, their first battle was to go to Bunker Mountain, which is also one of the must-go places in Boston. This is one of the most famous places in Boston, an ancient battlefield during the Revolutionary War. Because at the time of the Revolutionary War, this was a very important vantage point overlooking the entire Boston City area. At that time, our opponent, the British Army, launched 2 crazy attacks in order to seize the mountain, but they were repelled by our brave independent soldiers and civilians. The casualties of the British Army reached 1,000 people. But later, when the British Army attacked for the third time, our ammunition was not enough and we had to retreat, but it also won the hearts of the people. Later, because of a battle, it was also recorded in history. It was also at that time that George Washington was appointed as the commander-in-chief of the independent army. Although it was called Bunker Mountain, it was actually not a mountain, but a tower. It was built to commemorate this battle. For the people of the United States, this may be very memorable, but for Zhang Hai it was just that. After all, the history of the United States, from the beginning of the Mayflower War to the present, was less than 400 years. They really had no history here. Even if there was history, it was of the Native Americans, but this had nothing to do with the white people of the United States. Moreover, was the death of 1,000 people very heavy? Well, for the United Kingdom it might be very heavy. After looking at Bunker Mountain, which was actually a pillar, they went to the Old North Church, which was known as the oldest church in Boston. They also went to Farnell Hall, which was known as the Cradle of Freedom, and took a look at the Boston Library from the outside. However, they could not enter this place. Zhang Hai and the others were not students from this area. Moreover, he did not have the leisure to read books. Originally, Xueqi Clive wanted to take Zhang Hai to see the famous Granella Cemetery. However, Zhang Hai rejected. Huaxia people and the United States people had different thoughts. If they had nothing to do, why would they want to see a cemetery? The atmosphere was gloomy. Under normal circumstances, if it was not a new year, a festival, or a Memorial Day, the Chinese would rarely go to a cemetery. Although they were not afraid of their loved ones buried there, they would still have some doubts. Some people would say that this was a religion or superstition. However, these things were passed down from the older generation. You could choose not to believe it, but you could not ignore it. It was like some hidden rules in society. There were no written rules, but if you did not play by the rules of the game, you might be the unlucky one in the end. However, when Mu Di was mentioned, Zhang Hai could not help but think of his parents. Because he did not have much money back then, his parents did not buy a cemetery. Instead, they placed it at the crematorium. Of course, now that he had money, he could buy a cemetery. However, moving a cemetery was not something that could be done casually. One of the conditions was that they had to wait for 3 years before they could move. Now that his father had enough, his mother still needed 1 more year. Now, he was a little hesitant. Should he go back to take a look during the new year? Chapter 126. Wow, I didn't expect it to be so delicious. The taste is really good. Speaking of visiting Boston, Zhang Hai wasn't very interested in it. He came here mainly for 2 reasons. First, he really hadn't been here before. Second, it was Xueqi Clive who invited him. Of course, it was mainly because of the second reason. Speaking of which, Zhang Hai was more interested in natural scenery. He wasn't interested in the things in the city. The main reason for visiting Boston wasn't the scenery, but the people. The city of Boston wasn't big, and the scenery was concentrated in a few places. There weren't any scenic spots that required more than half an hour to visit. Therefore, after Zhang Hai decided not to go to the cemetery, their tour in Boston City was actually over. They made an appointment to visit other surrounding counties in the afternoon. They wanted to see Harvard, MIT, and so on. But before that, they needed to fill their stomachs. Later, Xueqi Clive took Zhang Hai to a restaurant. Although the restaurant looked small, shabby, and old from the outside, it was very popular. If Xueqi Clive hadn't made a reservation in advance, they might have had to wait for a few hours to get a seat. But even so, they were only able to get a seat after working for nearly half an hour. The location wasn't very good. It was a very small cubicle for 2 people. The seat next to it was used to store clothes, but it wasn't enough. They could only put it under their buttocks or put it on their legs. To be honest, Zhang Hai wasn't very satisfied with this place. He didn't say that he had to go to those magnificent Western restaurants to eat, but he didn't like the dilapidated appearance of this place. However, Xueqi Clive liked this place, so he couldn't say anything. He could only bite the bullet and sit there. When the waiter came to take their order, he looked around. Although the restaurant looked shabby, it actually had Chinese menu, and all the dishes were good. Most of them were seafood, and the main dishes were oysters and lobsters. At the same time, the price was definitely not cheap. It was even more expensive than the French restaurant Zhang Hai went to yesterday. Zhang Hai was a little speechless. According to Xueqi, the waiter's 18% tip was included in the price. In other words, after eating, they could leave directly without having to pay a tip. He had never eaten here before, so in the end, he let Xueqi order. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi ordered 2 sets of soup, 2 sets of lobster set, and 1 set of seafood set. After ordering, while they were waiting, Xueqi introduced the restaurant to Zhang Hai. The name of this restaurant was United Oyster House. It was the earliest restaurant in the United States. Therefore it had a great reputation. Many of the people who came to eat here were tourists from other places. Of course, the natives of the United States also liked to eat here. Especially for the old Bostonians, the taste of the seafood here was quite good. After hearing her introduction, Zhang Hai became more interested in this place. After a while, the waiter brought the food Zhang Hai ordered. The so-called soup was basically cheddar soup, but there were more ingredients, and the taste was stronger. The lobster set was steamed lobster with their own sauce. As for the oyster set, Zhang Hai just looked at it. Because the oysters were all raw, there were 2 opened oysters on a plate. 2 of them were raw oysters, but they were bigger than the oysters Zhang Hai usually bought at Bing City's night market for 10 renminbi. Inside the shells of the other 2 oysters were some raw oysters. In addition to these, there were 2 already peeled Arctic sweet prawns, a bowl of sauce, and 2 lemons. Looking at these things, Zhang Hai's first thought was to curse out loud. After all, these things cost more than $100, which was indeed a little too expensive. But when he suppressed his anger and took a sip of the soup in front of him, this thought disappeared without a trace, because the soup was indeed delicious. "I'm glad you like it." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi chuckled and drank the soup in front of him. Drinking the soup in front of him, Zhang Hai nodded seriously and said approvingly, "Well, the soup is really good. The soup is cheddar soup, but the taste is not bad." Then he tasted the lobster. This lobster was also different. Although it looked like a very ordinary lobster, when he opened it, he found that the meat inside had been torn and mixed with the cheese. After all, China is too big, and there are more cuisines. People in different places eat different things. For example, people in the Northeast like to eat greasy, oily, fried, fragrant, and large pieces of meat. Going further south, one of the 8 major cuisines, Lu cuisine, pays attention to taste. Lu cuisine does not pay too much attention to the taste of the ingredients themselves. They are more willing to let others taste their own seasoning skills, so when it comes to mixing, Lu cuisine is the best. Lu cuisine is not too focused on the taste of the ingredients themselves. They are more willing to let others taste their own seasoning skills, so when it comes to mixing, Lu cuisine is the best. Other Cantonese cuisine was light, Jiangsu cuisine was good-looking, and Sichuan cuisine was mainly numbing and spicy. Zhejiang cuisine was similar to Jiangsu cuisine in that it focused on presentation and delicacy. Fujian cuisine focused on the flavor of the ingredients. Anhui cuisine focused on stews with heavy fire and oil. Hunan cuisine was similar to Sichuan cuisine, except that it changed from numbing and spicy to numbing and fresh. But overall, there was a big difference between the north and the south. When northerners went to the south, everything they ate tasted bland. First, it didn't satisfy their hunger, and second, it didn't satisfy their cravings. Everything they ate felt wrong, and they couldn't be full no matter how much they ate. When southerners went to the north, it was the same. Because the food was too oily, they would get hot and blister in their mouth. It was very uncomfortable. This was the difference between the north and the south. If the food in this restaurant was divided according to the region of Huaxia, it should be similar to the north's cuisine. The lobster and soup were very fragrant, and there was a lot of cheese in it. It was very greasy and could satisfy one's cravings. Northerners tasted good, but southerners felt it was very greasy. They even felt a little hoarse. In China, people who were used to eating Sichuan, Jiangsu, Fujian, Zhejiang, Hunan, and Cantonese cuisines couldn't stand the taste. However, when it came to Zhang Hai, the taste was very good. It wasn't long before he finished the soup and lobster in front of him. As for the oysters, as mentioned before, Zhang Hai didn't eat raw food. Because his stomach wasn't good in the past, he was naturally a little afraid of raw food, especially seafood. Therefore, he didn't eat sashimi at all. He only knew that it wasn't cheap, but he wasn't used to eating it. Perhaps because she saw that Zhang Hai didn't want to eat oysters, the Xueqi Clive was more or less embarrassed. In fact, she didn't know that Zhang Hai didn't eat raw food. In this restaurant, oysters were the most famous because the oysters here were all wild Girardot oysters. This kind of oyster originated from France. In some seafood markets, it was sold for $3 each. Not to mention that they were in a restaurant. Here, a plate of 2 such oysters was sold for $30, which was quite expensive. However, this kind of oyster was indeed the best. As long as one knew the industry, no one would say that it was expensive. Because if it was in a Michelin restaurant, it would only be more expensive. French oysters had always been known as aristocratic seafood and the dream food of the world's foodies. Girardot oysters were the Rolls-Royce of oysters. It was said that the best oysters needed 4 years of cultivation and had to go through 95 cultivation and refining processes before they could be put on the market. 4 such top oysters. There were only 12 of them. In France, they were sold for more than €550. This showed the price of this kind of oyster. The oysters in this restaurant were naturally not cultivated in this way. Selling 2 for $30 was a good price. Moreover, didn't it include some other things? However, she didn't expect that Zhang Hai wouldn't eat it, so for a moment, she was a little embarrassed. Don't you want to eat this? Pointing at the oyster plate in front of her with a fork, Xueqi Clive asked in a low voice. Ah! Seeing Xueqi Clive's appearance, Zhang Hai also felt her embarrassment, but he didn't know what to say for a while. In fact, the best way to resolve the awkwardness was for him to eat a piece. But the problem was that he really didn't want to eat this thing, so for a while, his personality was a little awkward, and he didn't know what to do. Hey, who did I see? Isn't this the owner of the largest manor in the Boston area? Are you here to participate in the exhibition today? However, just as Zhang Hai was hesitating, a slightly joking voice came from a distance, and then he saw several people coming out of the restaurant. Most of them were white people, and there were 2 black people among them. The man walking in front saw Zhang Hai and Sandy in front of him. The joking voice came from his mouth. Are you talking to me? Feeling that the other party should be talking to him, Zhang Hai turned his head and looked at the people here. Of course, you are famous, aren't you? Farm owner. Hearing Zhang Hai's puzzled voice, the man here said proudly. Oh, who are you? Hearing that the other party was indeed talking to him, Zhang Hai was stunned and asked curiously. You don't recognize me? I am from Cartwright Company. Humph. You should be here to participate in the livestock exhibition. Chapter 127. Mujan? Cartwright Company? Hearing the other party's words, Zhang Hai searched in his mind. Then he lightly smacked his hand. Seeing Zhang Hai's expression, the other party laughed. It seemed that he remembered. You know who I am? Thinking of this, the man looked down at Zhang Hai and asked. I don't know, I don't remember at all. If there's nothing else, please make way. I still have to eat with my friend. Shaking his head, Zhang Hai stared at the man's face and said with a serious expression. I don't know why you're smashing your fist. You forget it. You win. But it doesn't matter. If it weren't for our company, I'd like to see how you'd sell your 20,000 cows. Seeing Zhang Hai's reaction, the man couldn't help but feel like he was about to explode. People like him were all extremely self-centered. Zhang Hai's words of ignoring him made him even angrier than Zhang Hai standing up and slapping him. However, he had to consider the other party's identity. Although in his opinion, Zhang Hai was just a nouveau riche, a country bumpkin, this country bumpkin had something that could control everything in the United States. Dollar. As the saying goes, people don't fight with officials. In the United States, ordinary people don't fight with the rich. Although he had some assets, compared to Zhang Hai's wealth, he was still far from it. It wasn't a wise choice to have a direct confrontation with him, so he took a deep breath and suppressed his anger. Then he threw out some harsh words and was about to leave. The people behind him didn't know what happened between him and Zhang Hai. But they weren't stupid. At this time, the most important thing was to keep their mouths shut. They should just quietly watch the show. What do my cows have to do with you, psycho? Hearing the other party's words, Zhang Hai naturally wasn't someone who was easy to talk to. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the man's body shook, but he didn't say anything else. Instead, he directly walked out of the restaurant. After these people left, sh20 Clive looked at Jiang Hai in surprise. You have a grudge with Cartwright Company? You can say that. I raised some cows, and one day, they came to my farm to take away one of my cows. Naturally, I didn't want to. Then, there was a little conflict. Seeing that Shenty Clive was curious about this matter, Jiang Hai slowly explained the situation that day. Then you might really be in trouble. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Shenty Clive frowned. What do you mean? Jiang Hai looked at her when he heard Shenty Clive's words. Did she know about this company too? Your subordinates didn't stop you from clashing with them? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, sh20 Clive didn't directly answer his question, but continued to ask. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai thought for a moment. It seemed that Robbins was trying to persuade him. That's right. Although my family doesn't raise cows, after all, my father is a Western chef. No matter if it's French, Italian, or even English cuisine, steak is very important. So when I was young, I often went to Western restaurants, and I more or less heard about this matter. Seeing Jiang Hai nod, sh20 Clive explained to Jiang Hai. This Cartwright Company is the largest beef broker in the few states around here. They don't produce cattle themselves, but they buy cattle from ranchers. Then, they buy the cattle at the price of the beef, and they sell it to Western restaurants and supermarkets to make a profit. They have a huge business network and connections. The Western restaurants in town have always used their beef. Looking at Jiang Hai, sh20 Clive also introduced this huge company to him. To put it bluntly, they are just a middleman. If worst comes to worst, I'll just sell my beef directly. As for the Cartwright Company, Jiang Hai also investigated them. He knew that they were the largest beef broker in the area. But just like what Jiang Hai said, he was confident in his cattle, so he didn't need to sell his cattle through this company. You still don't understand. You still don't understand. If you go directly to the door and sell these beef cattle, then the boss will definitely be willing to do this company a favor. After all, they have signed an exclusive sales agreement. Secondly, who knows if there is any problem with your beef cattle, not to mention the national inspection, this thing is just a random inspection, it is not very reliable. Compared to some big companies, an independent customer like you, the probability of a problem is too high. If there is a problem and you don't admit it, then they will have to pay for it themselves. This is something they absolutely don't want to see, so no matter what the reason is, if you go against this company, then you have already lost half of the battle. Sandy sighed. It can be seen that she really wanted to make friends with Jiang Hai. Otherwise, it would be easy to hurt their relationship if they talked too much. Moreover, Jiang Hai really didn't seem to understand these things. Oh, don't worry. I've thought about what you said. You can make a decision after you taste my beef tonight. Hearing Shenty Clive's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. If what he said was true, it would be difficult to sell his 20,000 cattle. After all, business was business. Moreover, he didn't have anything like a favor. If his beef cattle were really similar to other people's cattle, then his 20,000 cattle would be very easy to lose. But thinking about it, was his cattle the same as other people's cattle? Just based on the large range of marbled patterns, they were not the same thing. Moreover, Jiang Hai believed that the cattle raised by the grass planted with his own blood were not the same. Even if there were no marbled patterns, the taste would definitely not be worse than ordinary marbled beef. However, there was no proof now. Jiang Hai still felt that it would be better to let Shenty Clive taste it personally. In fact, in this manner, the people who were most worried about the fate of the cattle were Jiang Hai, Luo Binci, and the others. After all, they had patted their chests and said that they would definitely raise a batch of good cattle for Jiang Hai. When Jiang Hai gang had a falling out with the Cartwright Company, they were also very worried. However, after killing the 2 cows, their worries disappeared because they believed that even if the cows were now, as long as they went to a national exhibition, they would be able to survive. It would also instantly make a name for itself. Was 20,000 a lot? Oh, they were afraid that it wouldn't be enough. Okay. Although Shenty Clive was still hesitant, she and Jiang Hai had not known each other for a long time. That was why she did not want to say more. Moreover, she believed that Jiang Hai was not an arrogant person. After these few interactions, she had figured out Jiang Hai's character. The reason why he was so confident now must be because he had his own unique points. That was why she felt that she should eat Jiang Hai's beef at night first. After this incident, The matter of Zhang Hai not eating oysters was forgotten. After Sandy finished eating, Zhang Hai also went to pay for the meal. He was from Bing City, and people in Bing City had male chauvinism. He also had this habit. If he did not pay for the meal when he went out with a girl, he would feel uncomfortable. Today, Sandy was his guide, and he had never heard of a guide paying for a meal. Breakfast was an apology, and lunch was definitely on him. After paying the bill, both of them walked out of the restaurant and went to the parking lot. This afternoon, they had agreed to visit the universities here. The universities here were naturally Cambridge and Newton. However, these two places, although nominally belonged to Boston, they were actually part of Boston's metropolitan area. They were independent, and they had their own government. Just like Winthrop, they were part of the county-level area. It's also a bit far from the place where Zhang Hai and the others ate. After getting in the car, Zhang Hai started the engine and drove towards Cambridge City according to Xanthi's directions. The first place they want to visit is Harvard University. Zhang Hai was quite familiar with Harvard University. It was one of the top 3 universities in the world. Harvard, Harvard University, Oxford, Newlon College of Economics, and Stanford, Slovak Tankor Institute of Fashion Design. Just kidding, in fact, Zhang Hai had no interest in Harvard. After all, he went to a low-level university. So, he didn't have any interest in the university, studying, and so on. However, as Katie Clive said, when you arrive at a place, of course, you have to see the landmarks of this place and understand the history of this place. Only then can you be considered to have truly visited this place, not to mention that Zhang Hai had settled here. Therefore, Zhang Hai did not refuse. Whether he liked it or not, it would not be wrong to go and see it. However, when he was driving to Harvard, he saw a huge square not far away from Boston. At this time, there were many pickup trucks parked in this square. There were also a lot of cattle, sheep, horses, and other large livestock. After all, Zhang Hai raised cattle. When he passed by, he couldn't help but take a look. When he saw the English words, Massachusetts Grazing Exhibition, hanging on the front door, he couldn't help but be stunned. Massachusetts Grazing Exhibition. I seem to know it. Looking at these words, Zhang Hai whispered. He remembered that after he had a falling out with the Cartwright Company, he once asked the cowboys under him if there were any recent cattle and sheep exhibitions. They seem to have said that there were a total of 2 recent exhibitions, one of which was in Massachusetts and the other one was in the East. Because he was confident in his cattle, Zhang Hai directly ordered to participate in the East. However, Zhang Hai remembered that according to their words, the Massachusetts exhibition was in January. It should be just after the new year. It seems that the one being held now should be the Massachusetts Grazing Exhibition. Interested? Then let's go and see it together. Seeing Zhang Hai's eyes looking outside, Sandy's voice also came. Chapter 128. Wow, there are a lot of things here. Looking at the animals stored in the tents around him, Zhang Hai said with some surprise. Of course, young man, but this is only a grazing exhibition in Massachusetts. If it's in the East or even the whole country, it would be even bigger. Hearing his words, a person brushing a horse's mane in a nearby booth also smiled and said, "Ha ha." Hearing the other party's words, Zhang Hai nodded kindly and continued to stroll around here. Is this your first time attending a grazing exhibition like this? Looking at Zhang Hai's curious gaze, Xueqi Clive, who followed him in, also followed behind him with a smile on her face. Well, yes. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai didn't think too much and answered directly. Now his eyes are a little short. Although this grazing exhibition is only in Massachusetts, the scale is a little beyond his expectations. In the past, he had only heard of grazing exhibitions, but this was the first time he had seen one with his own eyes. He had originally thought that grazing exhibitions that covered an entire state would probably only have a dozen or so booths, or maybe even 20 booths. After all, Massachusetts itself was a small state. It's a small state that is difficult to see clearly on the map of the United States, but when he came here, he realized that he was a little too naive. The entire venue covers an area of about 4 square kilometers, which is 2 kilometers horizontally and 2 kilometers vertically. Just like the Chinese character Tian, it is divided into 4 areas, namely the Cattle Exhibition Hall, the Horse Exhibition Hall, the Sheep Exhibition Hall, and the Supporting Exhibition Hall. Zhang Hai entered the Horse Exhibition Hall. As soon as he walked in, he found that there were at least 30 or 40 individual exhibition halls. Of course, this was not a game exhibition or a food price exhibition. Those exhibitions were held indoors, and models were invited. However, this exhibition was outdoors. Although it was called an individual exhibition hall, it was actually a separate stable. Many horses were kept in the stable for people to choose. Of course, there were also some that were not for sale, such as the horse of the man who talked to Zhang Hai just now. It was a very good horse, a pure white purebred horse. In England, it was used as a horse for the royal guards. The bloodline certificate hanging next to it was quite complete, and it had even participated in a dressage competition. The front of the stable was connected to a TV, which showed the horse's performance during the competition. If such a horse was sold in its prime, it would not be rare for it to be sold for millions of dollars. But it was obvious that the man wouldn't kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. He was mainly selling the offspring of this horse. He would find another pure-blooded horse and breed the offspring to be 1-year-old ponies. If the offspring were in good condition, they could be sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Even if the offspring weren't in good condition, they could still be sold for tens of thousands of dollars. They were much more expensive than regular horses. Zhang Hai didn't know much about horses. He was only here to watch the fun. After all, his family's Xia was still in a state of free range. There was no other way. After buying the horse, he didn't have time to domesticate it. In his opinion, riding a horse wasn't an easy thing to do. It needed to be learned alone. Back then, Luo Binci and the others were very busy, so he didn't have the heart to learn. But now, looking at these horses, he had the urge to go back and ride them. Of course, even if he wanted to ride them, he would not ride them now. Zhang Hai planned to wait until spring came and the flowers bloomed. Then he would learn to ride a horse. Zhang Hai believed that with the horse he had fed for so long in his blood, if he wanted to ride a horse, this guy should not resist. While thinking, Zhang Hai and Xueqi Clive walked out of the stable. Although Zhang Hai was very curious about Mu Mu Zhan, he was mainly curious about the cow. Compared to a cowboy, a horse was naturally a very good thing. But for Zhang Hai, a horse, to put it bluntly, was just a means of transportation. He was not a professional cowboy, so he was not very interested in horses. The most important thing was that the horses here were really not cheap. Walking with Sandy along the way, they walked past the stable and entered the largest and most crowded market next to it, the cattle exhibition hall. As soon as they walked in, the smell of cattle rushed into Zhang Hai's nose. Even Sandy couldn't help but cover her nose with her hand, let alone Zhang Hai. Cough cough, it's so choking. Turning his head, Zhang Hai was choked by the smell. He couldn't help but frown and said carefully, although the smell here was not as strong as his own cattle shed, it was definitely not bad. Hee, you are a manor owner. You can't even stand the smell of cattle. Looking at Zhang Hai's appearance, Sandy next to him smiled and took out a handkerchief from her small bag and handed it to Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai immediately took the handkerchief and covered his nose. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. The handkerchief was very fragrant. Zhang Hai also knew that this was a man-made fragrance. It was not good for the human body, but smelling this smell was better than smelling cattle farts. So I almost never enter our cattle shed. Even if I go in, I have to wear a mask. After taking a deep breath, Zhang Hai finally calmed down. Then he looked at the smiling Xueqi Clive and shrugged. You still need to adapt early. Although Uncle Robbins is a good person, it is your own business after all. You have to know what to do. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi Clive said with a chuckle. Of course. By the way, did you know? Some people say that the main reason for global warming is that cows fart too much. The farts of a few cows in a year are almost as much as the exhaust of a car. After hearing Xueqi Clive's words, Zhang Hai smiled a little embarrassedly. He was a little embarrassed to be criticized by a beautiful woman, so he changed the topic. However, the change of topic was not ordinary. Xueqi Clive didn't know how to respond to Zhang Hai's words. Should he talk about cattle farts? Stop joking. Fortunately, Xueqi Clive knew Zhang Hai's personality, so he didn't care. To put it bluntly, Zhang Hai's personality was still a little chinibu. At least, he didn't show that he had a superior EQ. It seemed that although the true dragon soul essence could strengthen his physique and memory, it didn't change his EQ. Seeing that Shenty Clive wasn't interested in talking about cattle farts, Zhang Hai didn't have much interest in talking about it. Zhang Hai also curled his lips. He didn't feel that there was anything wrong with saying such things at this time, but it was a pity that he couldn't show off his knowledge. Then he covered his nose and walked into the cattle exhibition hall. When he first walked in, the smell was really choking, but after a short while, it was much better. The cattle exhibition hall was much more lively than the horse exhibition hall. There were more than 100 booths, but most of the booths were for private farms. There were only a few cows in total, but there were all kinds of different styles. In addition to the Angus cattle that Zhang Hai was very familiar with, there were many other types of beef cattle. There were Piedmont, Limousin, Simmental, Charolais, Hayford, and so on. In addition to beef cattle, there were also dairy cows and draft cattle. Although cattle were no longer used for farming in the United States, some people were still willing to collect draft cattle. Therefore, the cattle here were really diverse. Looking at the cattle in front of him, Zhang Hai also chatted with Xueqi Clive. While looking at the variety of cattle in front of him, suddenly, a cow entered his eyes. Yes, it was a cow, not a herd. This was because there was only one cow in the exhibition hall. This exhibition hall was definitely not small, and it wouldn't be a problem to hold a dozen cows. But at this time, there was only one cow. But even so, this cow shed looked a lot more pocket-sized. Looking at the cow, Zhang Hai slowly walked over. This cow was very big and very tall, even taller than Zhang Hai. Its body length was also much longer than an ordinary cow. Zhang Hai looked at it and saw that it was about 3 meters tall. Its entire body was covered in thick fur, and there was a pair of small horns on its head. Although the horns were not big for its size, they were unusually sharp. Its pair of eyes stared warily at everyone, looking here and there. Is this American bison? Seeing this huge guy, Zhang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then he asked Xueqi Clive suspiciously, because he seemed to have seen this guy in the zoo before. It was obviously not an ordinary domestic cow, so it must be a bison. It seems to be. Xueqi Clive didn't specialize in cattle, but she was a primary school teacher. She led the children to the zoo, so naturally, she needed to explain. Looking at the cow in front of her, she was also a little uncertain. You guys really have good taste. This is indeed American bison, but it's not wild. The wild ones are all in Yellowstone Park. This one is an experimental animal that our school has raised privately. This time, we came to the exhibition mainly to raise funds to domesticate this kind of bison. Just when Zhang Hai and Xueqi Clive were a little uncertain, a young man walked over from the side. Compared to the other people in the exhibition hall, who were either in suits or jeans, this person's clothes were much more ordinary. It was just a down jacket with a school emblem on his chest. Zhang Hai didn't know what the emblem represented, but Xueqi Clive did. Hearing this person's words, she took the initiative to nod. Are you students from B City University? Xueqi Clive looked at the person in front of her and asked curiously. Oh yes, we are in ecology and evolution. Our research topic is the large-scale domestication of wild animals. Hearing Xanthi's words, the student immediately smiled and answered. It was an honor to answer a beauty's question. Chapter 129. Boston University, or BU for short, was founded in 1839. Most people's first impression of it would be that it was a public university, but that was not the case. It was actually a private university, and it was one of the top private universities in the world. It was also the third largest private university in the United States. It had a high academic reputation in the world, and it had always been in the top 100 in the world and the top 50 in North America. It was ranked 32nd in the world. It had produced 6 Nobel Prize winners and 22 Pulitzer Prize winners. The most famous alumnus was probably Martin Luther King, who loved to dream. Don't think that just because this university had produced so many Pulitzer Prize winners, it was just a journalism university. In fact, journalism wasn't a very important subject in this university. The subjects they were most proficient in were business, engineering, economics, and biomedical engineering. This subject could even be ranked in the top 10 in the United States. In the evaluation, ecology, evolution, and systems biology were ranked 6th in the United States. Of course, this had nothing to do with Zhang Hai. He did not have any interest in studying. However, He was very interested in this research because he knew that even domesticated beef cattle could not be compared to wild cattle. Firstly, there was a huge difference in weight. The heaviest bison in the United States could reach a ton. This was something that domestic beef cattle couldn't compare to. Secondly, this type of bison, even if it was domesticated, was still a bison. It was just like the wild boar in China. Even if it was domesticated, it was still a wild boar. Selling it would be expensive. Perhaps the price might not be high in the United States, but if it was sold in China, it would be very expensive. Once he said that it was wild beef, the already high price would at least double. At this time, Xueqi Clive was already a little tired. Compared to Zhang Hai, it was obvious that the big boy opposite him was more speechless. It was true that she was a teacher, but it did not mean that a teacher would like academic questions. Although she was not like those vain girls, who would open their mouths to talk about branded clothes, good makeup products, jewelry, shoes, and so on, she was willing to listen to some romantic topics. Zhang Hai's bullshit tea was already cold enough. But this young man spoke even more coldly. What DNA, what helix, what chromosomal pairs, what XY. She listened to him in confusion, but this young man clearly talked about the field that he was best at, and there was no end to it. It would be rude to just walk away, so she hesitated for a while and decided to follow Zhang Hai. However, when she saw that Zhang Hai was looking at the cow, she deliberately walked over. Seeing that the goddess in front of them had only said a few words and then returned to the yellow man's side, the students here couldn't help but be a little speechless. There was no other way. People like them who engaged in research were also a kind of otaku. Obviously, they were not very good at observing women. Although Zhang Hai had such a character, at least he was more familiar with Xueqi Clive. Hey! Isn't this the great manor owner? What's wrong? Are you interested in this cow? Unfortunately, it's not for sale. Just as the big boy did not know what to say, a few figures walked over from a distance. The person leading them was the guy Zhang Hai had seen in the restaurant today. He was from the Carlight Company. Beside him, in addition to the few people they met at noon, there were a few people wearing the same clothes as the boy in front of Zhang Hai. From the school badge on their chest, it could be seen that they were all from B City University. Our company invested in the development of this cow. In other words, this cow belongs to our company. Look at the surrounding cow sheds. 80% of them belong to our company. Unfortunately, there is no place for you here. What's the matter? You're so old that you can't sell it? Looking at Zhang Hai, the man said with a sour face. What a pity. Although the cows here belong to your company, they don't seem to belong to you. His cows all belong to him. Are you standing here and talking like this because you envy him? Hearing his words, Zhang Hai didn't have time to speak, but Cindy Clive, who was beside him, had already stood up, a trace of anger flashing across her face. From her point of view, this fellow had come to find fault with them, and it was somewhat baffling. Zhang Hai didn't even know him, but he kept coming here to make his presence known. His words were so sour. Who was he trying to convince? After being insulted by Zhang Hai, he still came here to show off. She really didn't know where his sense of superiority came from. In terms of size, he wasn't as good as Zhang Hai, and in terms of money, he was even worse. Zhang Hai had a manor worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And this guy was just a worker, so why was he showing off here? Even Xueqi Clive couldn't stand it anymore. She walked to the front and said to the man, I envy him? What do I envy him for? He's just a country bumpkin. Hearing Xueqi's words, the man couldn't help but be speechless for a while. After he finished speaking, he whispered something in a low voice. But this sentence was heard by Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai was a pure northeastern man. Northeastern men were particular about fighting, not quarreling. This guy's words were originally sour, which made Zhang Hai a little unhappy. And now, this guy actually dared to talk about him in front of his face. How could he endure it? Zhang Hai's temper wasn't very good, so he took a big stride and directly arrived in front of this person. In front of everyone's eyes, Zhang Hai grabbed this guy's collar and directly lifted him up. Feeling the strength of Zhang Hai's steel-like arm, this guy was somewhat stunned. He grabbed Zhang Hai's arm with one hand while his other hand was constantly waving in the air. You, what are you doing? Put me down, security, security! Hearing his exclamation, several security guards, who were watching in the distance, quickly ran over at this time. As for the researchers and students around him, they were a little confused. It was not an exaggeration to say that these students were straight-A students. However, straight-A students were more focused on their studies and not on fighting. When they saw such a thing, they could not wait to avoid it. How could they go forward? He called me a country bumpkin, I heard it, can I sue him? Zhang Hai looked at the guy who kept struggling in his hand, sneered, then turned his head and said to Xueqi, "It seems that you can't, but if you teach him a lesson, you probably only need to pay some medical expenses." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xanthi also smiled and said slowly, but although she said that, she winked at Zhang Hai. "Oh, I see. It's a pity that I lack everything but money." Staring at the person in front of him, Zhang Hai sighed. In the United States, where everything can be related to race, it's not illegal to call someone a country bumpkin. Zhang Hai really felt that he was a dog. But to teach a lesson to this snobbish guy, it wasn't as simple as what Sandy said. What she said was more for this guy to hear. She winked at Zhang Hai, telling him that if Zhang Hai really hit him, then it might not be as simple as what she said. Zhang Hai didn't think that Sandy would be able to teach him a lesson. After all, Zhang Hai just got his green card. If he gets involved in any violent conflict, it won't be good for Zhang Hai. Sir, please calm down. Let go of the person in your hand, otherwise, we will call the police." At this time, the security guards over there also quickly ran over, but they didn't dare to act rashly. The security guards in the United States believe that work is work, life is life. Work is only for making money, and it's not worth it to lose your life for money. So after these people surrounded Zhang Hai, they didn't say much, they just persuaded Zhang Hai to let go. Boring. Looking at the security guards around him, Zhang Hai curled his lips. He originally thought that these guys would directly rush over. Now it seems that these guys have no guts, but he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. He directly let go of the man and pushed him away. The man was in mid-air, so where could he borrow strength from? He was directly pushed to the ground by Zhang Hai, falling heavily on his butt. "You barbarian, you country bumpkin, I want to sue you." Feeling the pain in his butt, the most important thing is that he lost all his face this time. At this time, the man couldn't help but jump up, covering his painful butt with one hand, and shouted while jumping, "Whatever. Zhang Hai just pushed him like this, it's not even a slight injury, the police won't care about it. You are a barbarian, you are a butcher, you yellow. Cough, as long as I am still in the company, you can't sell a cow, don't think about it." Seeing Zhang Hai's indifferent look, the guy couldn't help but curse, but halfway through, he just came out with the word, "Yilu." And he stopped in time because he remembered that this guy just asked the beautiful woman beside him if what he said was racial discrimination. Originally, country bumpkin didn't count, but if he finished this sentence, then it would count. At the same time, he also saw the coldness in Zhang Hai's eyes, which made him stop his words in time and attack Zhang Hai's cow. In his opinion, Zhang Hai's cow is good, but it is destined that this cow can't be sold after offending him. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai's mouth couldn't help but twitch. Can't sell? That's if it's of the same quality as this guy's cow, it can't be sold. But is Zhang Hai's cow of the same quality as him? Don't joke, Zhang Hai's cow, just looking at the meat, even the Japanese Wagyu cattle may not be comparable to him, let alone these free-range cows in the United States. Do you want to bet? Squinting, Zhang Hai looked at the guy in front of him and said with disdain. Chapter 130. Bet. What bet? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the man shut his mouth for the time being and asked hesitantly. Let's bet on whose cow will be the winner of the New York Livestock Exhibition in April. If your company wins, I'll personally lose $1 million to you. If my cow wins, then I'm sorry, you'll lose $1 million to me. If you don't have the money to pay, then you'll have to kneel down and kowtow to me 3 times. Zhang Hai smiled disdainfully at the man in front of him. $1 million? Hearing these words, many of the onlookers gasped. Well, they didn't think that the bet would be so big. Many of the onlookers nearby were ordinary farm owners. Although they weren't considered poor farmers in the United States, they were still considered middle class. After deducting the taxes they had to pay every year, it would be good if they had $40,000 or $50,000 left. Even if they made $50,000 a year, it would take 20 years to earn back $1 million. Ever since the United States started to control the exchange rate of the dollar, there had been no more problems with inflation. It was very likely that the value of $1 million now would be the same as 10 or 20 years later. In other words, it was pure profit. Thinking of this, these people all looked at the Cartwright Company's employee. In their eyes, this $1 million was pure profit for Cartwright Company. After all, they had been the winner of the New York Livestock Exhibition for 3 consecutive years. This was practically free money. Obviously, they didn't think that Jiang Hai could raise more than a middleman like Cartwright. But this employee didn't think so. He was very cautious. First, he was tempted by the $1 million. Second, he was worried about what he would do if he lost. He definitely couldn't afford $1 million, and the company definitely wouldn't pay $1 million for him. But if he had to kneel down and kowtow, he wouldn't be willing no matter what. In a democratic country like the United States, although the thing people worshipped the most was money, they wouldn't be willing to give up their self-esteem and kneel down and kowtow unless they were forced to. Therefore, he was still struggling. Looking at Jiang Hai's eyes, he was hesitant and hesitant. "Hey, Paul, what are you hesitating for? This guy is giving you money for free. There's no reason for you not to accept it." "That's right. You're too timid. Young man, if he doesn't want to bet with you, I'll bet with you. 1 million. How long will it take you to earn that much money? What's there to hesitate about?" Seeing him hesitating, some people who were familiar with him started to shout loudly. Hearing these people's words, Paul licked his lips with hesitation as his eyes turned firm at once. "Okay, I'll bet with you." Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, Paul shouted. Hearing that, Jiang Hai shrugged too. It was fine for him to gamble. He wasn't doing it for the $1 million, but to prove himself. This guy dared to be so arrogant in front of him. If he didn't step on him, who would he step on? After this person agreed, some busybodies pulled over a lawyer on the spot. After all, this was an exhibition, and it was also for sales. Since it was for sales, a contract had to be signed. When signing the contract, the lawyer must be present. Now that Jiang Hai and this guy named Paul had a bet, naturally, the lawyer had to sign the agreement to take effect. After the lawyer came to ask for the opinions of both sides, he didn't say much and directly drafted an agreement. Here, it can't be called a bet, it can only be called an agreement. Then, Jiang Hai and this person signed their respective agreements. The two agreed that if the Cartwright Company's cattle won the top bid at the New York Livestock Exhibition in April this year, Jiang Hai would give Paul K $1 million, effective immediately. If the cattle from Jiang Hai's manor won the top bid, Paul K would give Jiang Hai $1 million, effective immediately. There were 3 copies of the agreement. Jiang Hai and K each held one, and the lawyer kept the other. After everything was done, Jiang Hai and Xueqi Clive didn't want to continue looking. After all, according to Paul K, 80% of the shops here belonged to his company. Jiang Hai didn't want to be pointed at here and unable to buy anything. Rather than that, it was better to just leave. So, Jiang Hai didn't hesitate and directly left. After the two walked out of the exhibition hall, Jiang Hai originally wanted to go home directly. But when he looked at the time, it was only 2 in the afternoon. It was still early. If he went back now, he didn't know if Luo Binci and the others had returned. So, his originally extinguished idea of going to see a school was reignited. Anyway, we have nothing to do now. Let's go see the nearby schools. Jiang Hai glanced at Xueqi Clive and said to her. When she heard Jiang Hai's words, Sandy, who was originally a little worried about whether Jiang Hai would lose, couldn't help but be taken aback. It seems that you don't care about your bet this time. Okay, let's go. Xueqi Clive gently shook her head and smiled at Jiang Hai. Then the two stepped into the car parked at the entrance of the exhibition and headed to Cambridge. Cambridge was a city, and though it was in a broad sense in Boston, it was a very different city from Boston, geographically and in the reports of the city, opposite Boston on the other side of the Charles River. However, although this city wasn't big, and its population was only about 100,000, it was quite famous in the United States and even the world. This was because there were 2 universities here, 2 super universities. One of them was the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Perhaps everyone was a little confused when they said this name. Massachusetts, some people in China also called it Massachusetts. And this state's Institute of Technology was the legendary Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the most powerful existence in science and engineering. The other university is Harvard University, a giant in the education world. Other universities can't wait to let the world know about the President of the United States, but Harvard University has produced 8 presidents of the United States. Among them, the current president is from Harvard University. The number of Nobel Prize winners here is also in the hundreds of thousands or millions. Famous alumni, such as Bill Gates and Roosevelt, have all studied here. Of course, everyone knows that Bill Gates is not a good student, but he is famous. Driving, not long after, the two arrived at this famous university. But to be honest, when walking into this university, Zhang Hai did not feel anything different. It may be because he really has no love for learning, or it may be because it is winter, and there is snow everywhere. Of course, it may also be because it is the holiday now, and there are not many students in the university. So what he has read in novels before, such as the overwhelming academic atmosphere, the soul-shaking ethereal school, and the touching cultural accomplishment, there are none at all. Zhang Hai just walked around and saw some landmark buildings at the same time. He used his mobile phone to take a photo with them and sent it to his circle of friends. Recently, he almost didn't go on QQ much. He used WeChat more often, and his WeChat friends, there are not many. In addition to his friends, there are only a few junior high school and high school classmates that he hardly contacted. In total, there are only a dozen people. It looks really lonely. Phew, we should go too. After taking the last photo, Zhang Hai couldn't help but take a look at the time. Although he didn't like to visit the university, since he visited, he should visit the places that should be visited. So unknowingly, although it was just walking around the main campus, it took him nearly 2 hours. There is no other way. Harvard is really not small. The entire campus area is 4,882 acres. Just the main campus alone is 224 acres. They walked around the main campus for nearly an hour. They just roughly looked at the other places, and the sky was already a little dark. Looking at the time on his mobile phone, it was already 4:30 in the afternoon. Zhang Hai exhaled a breath of hot air and said to Xanthi Clay. Just now, he had received a call from Luo Binsi, and they had already returned. As for the task that Zhang Hai gave them, the lobster, there was naturally no problem. Today their luck was quite good. Not only did they catch the lobster that Zhang Hai wanted, but they also caught a lot of prawns, crabs, and other things. This also allowed Zhang Hai's fishermen to have a preliminary understanding of Zhang Hai's fishing ground. When natural resources were extremely scarce outside, Zhang Hai's fishing ground was really a paradise. However, Zhang Hai was not the only one who wanted to enter the paradise. Luo Binsi also told Zhang Hai that when they were patrolling today, they saw a fishing boat in the distance, but when the fishing boat saw Luo Binsi, it quickly fled. However, it also reminded Zhang Hai that it seems that someone has been eyeing his fishing ground. Although it is possible to use a boat to patrol, after all, it takes too long and it is easy for others to take advantage of the loopholes. After Zhang Hai answered the phone, he was already thinking about buying a helicopter and a small agricultural plane. Even if it is just for patrolling, it is worth buying this thing. Of course, even if he wants to buy it, it will have to be tomorrow. He still has guests today. Okay. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi Clive, who had just helped Zhang Hai take a photo, also smiled and said. Then, she walked behind Zhang Hai and walked out of the school. But just as the two walked out of the school gate, suddenly, a somewhat reckless figure rushed from the street in the distance. Zhang Hai's reaction was extremely fast. He dodged immediately, but after dodging, he remembered that Xueqi Clive was still by his side, so he immediately pulled her, but he was still a bit late. Although he pulled her body over, this person still bumped into his shoulder. Chapter 131. Hey, watch your steps. Looking at Sandy being hit, Zhang Hai, as a man, naturally shouted at the person on the other side. However, that person didn't turn around. Instead, he ran forward at a faster speed. Something's wrong. Check if your phone and wallet are still there. Looking at the speed of this little guy, Zhang Hai narrowed his eyes and immediately said to Xueqi Clive. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Sandy reacted at this time. She immediately reached into her coat pocket. Sure enough, the wallet that should have been in her coat pocket had disappeared. Damn guy, you go and drive, I'll chase after him. Seeing that this guy was really a thief, Zhang Hai secretly cursed. He was really unlucky. It was not easy to go shopping with a girl, but the first thing he did was to meet the guy from the Cartwright Company, who provoked him. He was targeted by a thief when he was walking out of the university. It was really F***ed up. At the moment he was bold. He didn't say much. After throwing the car key directly to H20 Clive, who was still in a daze, he chased in the direction the thief left. How fast was Zhang Hai? In the words of the NBA assistant coach who tested him, he was as fast as lightning. Of course, this was nonsense, but if he wanted to, it would not be a problem for him to participate in the Olympic 100-meter sprint final. After a few minutes, he had already rushed around the corner. As soon as he turned the corner, he saw the guy just now. At this time, this guy was in front of the roadside trash bin, looking for H20 Clive's wallet that he had just stolen. He happened to turn around and saw Zhang Hai rushing over. He was shocked. He didn't have time to think about it. He stuffed the wallet into his tattered shirt, and then ran away crazily. Who the F***ck? Looking at his movements, Zhang Hai couldn't help but curse. Then, he continued to accelerate and rushed forward. The distance between the two was quickly narrowing, but just as he was about to catch the guy turned and went into a small alley just now. As previously mentioned, the Boston area was the oldest city. Soon after the European colonists came to North America, they established the Boston area here. Therefore, the urban area here was very narrow. It could be said that the roads here were the most difficult to walk in the metropolitan cities in the United States. Although Cambridge was not considered the urban area of Boston, the situation here was similar. It was winter now. The government would clear the snow and ice on the main roads, but not on some small roads. When Zhang Hai also turned a corner and stepped into this small alley, he almost fell down in an instant. Because at this time, there was a thick layer of ice on the ground of this small alley. This ice was not pure and transparent, but colorful. There were all kinds of garbage on it. In some corners, there were a lot of human or animal excrement. As soon as Zhang Hai walked into this small alley, he subconsciously wanted to go out. It can be imagined how disgusting it would be to fall down here, but when he looked at the thief who was moving quickly in front of him, he couldn't help but grit his teeth. Damn it! If it was another time, he would have caught him long ago. He wouldn't be in such a difficult situation now. But Zhang Hai didn't want to let this guy go. Looking at the sky that was about to turn dark, Zhang Hai secretly cursed. He moved his feet and ran in this small alley. Fortunately, Zhang Hai usually doesn't like to wear formal clothes, so his shoes now are military whips bought at the outdoor goods store. This kind of shoe has a strong grip. Although running on the ice is still very slippery, at least if you are careful, you won't fall so easily. But the kid on the opposite side is obviously used to such a scene. He didn't care about the garbage on the ground or even the excrement. He ran out of the small alley quickly. When Zhang Hai chased out of the small alley, this guy had already pulled away a lot. If it weren't for Zhang Hai's good enough eyesight, he would have been unable to catch this guy's figure. But fortunately, he finally left that damn alley. Zhang Hai instantly ran and chased the thin figure in the distance. The two of them, one chasing and one fleeing, ran for about 20 minutes. The kid's stamina was finally about to run out, and his speed was getting slower and slower. If he wasn't very familiar with the surrounding terrain, he might have been caught by Zhang Hai long ago. Zhang Hai also stepped on the ice and followed him all the way. As he turned into a small alley again, Zhang Hai also followed in. But after entering, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile because this small alley is dead. At this time, he saw this figure running quickly to the innermost part of the alley, and Zhang Hai also breathed a sigh of relief. He slowly tidied up his clothes, stepped on the hard ice, and walked towards this figure. Still running? Why are you running? Give me back my wallet. Looking at the thief in front of him, Zhang Hai chuckled and said in English as he walked. Seeing Zhang Hai's figure coming over, the thief couldn't help but be a little scared. His hands clutched his clothes tightly. Every time Zhang Hai took a step forward, he couldn't help but take a step back. Not long after, he was already leaning against the cold wall at the entrance of the alley. Zhang Hai also walked in front of him and looked at him condescendingly. On his small face, only a pair of big eyes were staring at Zhang Hai, but there was no sign of weakness or fear. Hey, kid, you won't cry until you see the coffin, right? Give it to me. Seeing that the thief didn't return the wallet in such a situation, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smack his lips. He wasn't a good-tempered person. Without saying anything, his right hand instantly grabbed the thief, but the thief was flexible enough. He bent down and used the sliding force of the ice to instantly slip under Zhang Hai's legs. But when he wanted to run again, Zhang Hai directly grabbed his collar with his left hand and lifted him up. When he caught him, Zhang Hai was a little surprised because this thief looked about 1.6 meters tall. Maybe because it was winter and he was wearing a lot of clothes, he didn't look too light. But when Zhang Hai lifted him up, he was stunned for a moment because this thief really seemed to be too light, only about 60 or 70 pounds. This height and weight made Zhang Hai a little surprised, but it only surprised him for a moment. Then he was ready to look for the wallet. Bang, 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 bang. However, this thief didn't seem to admit defeat so easily. Although he didn't make any sound, his body kept struggling, especially his legs. He kept kicking the door next to the alley, making a harsh sound. Just as Zhang Hai was about to take out the wallet, the door on the other side was opened. And at the same time, it wasn't just this door that opened. There were more than a dozen doors that opened at the same time. Then from the door, 20 or 30 people came out. These people were both men and women. No matter if it was a man or a woman, they were all dressed like the child in Zhang Hai's hands. They were all tattered, and the men were basically dirty. As for the women, some of the older ones were much cleaner. At least there was no black ash on their faces, and their hair was combed. Some of the younger ones were basically not much different from the boys. When they saw Zhang Hai and this person, a trace of panic flashed in their eyes, but after the panic they calmed down. The women didn't seem to see this scene and turned back to the room. The remaining 13 men surrounded Zhang Hai. Some of them even took out switchblades from their pockets and looked at Zhang Hai with an unfriendly face. From the time these people came out to Zhang Hai, they didn't say a word. But Zhang Hai understood what these people meant. Since Zhang Hai came, then they had no intention of letting Zhang Hai go. Hey, it's still a gang. Looking at these people in front of him, Zhang Hai didn't dare to be careless. After all, these people were holding weapons in their hands. Judging from their faces, these people weren't very old. They were basically around 20 years old. This was the time when people were most reckless. Although Zhang Hai's physical fitness was good, he still had to be careful. Come on. Throwing the thief in his hand aside, Zhang Hai looked down and found that his side was really clean. There wasn't even a wooden board. It seemed that he could only fight with his bare hands. Seeing Zhang Hai's actions, the men here looked at each other. The two youngest men standing at the front were pushed out first. These two guys didn't have weapons in their hands. They also knew that the purpose of being pushed out was to test Zhang Hai's level. So after looking at each other, they didn't say much and directly rushed towards Zhang Hai. If it was the old Zhang Hai, he might be a little flustered, but don't forget. Recently, he had been learning martial arts from Bale, and he practiced almost every day. Coupled with his strong physical fitness, he didn't think much of an attack like this. He casually lifted his leg and kicked the chest of the boy on his right. The huge impact caused the boy to stagnate in the air for a moment. Then he flew out and smashed into the door not far away. As for the other boy, he was in a much worse state than him. After Zhang Hai kicked the person on the left, he directly grabbed the clothes of the person on the right and threw him straight towards the people holding the switchblade. When these people saw this scene, they were stunned for a moment. They subconsciously put away their switchblades. After all, they didn't want to hurt their own people. However, the result of this was that they were all knocked down by the young man who threw them. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Zhang Hai took a big stride and went towards the people who didn't have a switchblade in their hands. He wanted to pick the weakest among them. Chapter 132. Then, he squatted down and dodged the opponent's fist. Then, he used two more nest fists and directly hit the stomach. Then, he jumped up and used a knee strike and a whip kick. The two people standing at the front instantly fell to the ground and lost their ability to fight. After landing, he kicked a person's calf and used the ice to sweep this person down. Then, he took a step forward and grabbed a person. He pulled him back and used his elbow to hit the person's jaw. Then, he used his body as a cushion to block the second wave of attacks from the people around him. Then, he threw another person over his shoulder and blocked the opponent's fist. Then, he closed in and uppercut, followed by a chop to the throat. Then, he threw another person over his shoulder into the crowd. While he suppressed a few people, he rushed to the others and hit the throat with a hand knife. Then, he stepped on the feet and used the hardness of the military whip to kick the opponent's knee. Then, he grabbed the opponent's head and used a knee strike to kill another person. Then, he moved into the arms of another person and used his elbow to hit the back of the opponent's head. At the same time, he used his knee to hit the opponent's stomach. There was a huge difference between those who had learned fighting techniques and those who hadn't. If Zhang Hai had not learned martial arts, he would have been able to deal with these people. If they did not have weapons, Zhang Hai would have been able to take a few hits. However, in the situation where the opponent had weapons, he was much more passive. After all, although his body was at the limit of a human's body, there would still be 2 holes in his body if he was hit. However, now that he had such skills, Zhang Hai's self-confidence was extremely inflated. While he was trying to think of a way to make the people with switchblades unable to come forward, he had already rushed to the other side, where there were also unarmed people. There were a total of 13 people here. 4 of them were armed with switchblades, and 9 of them were not. 2 of them were taken care of by him, and 7 of them were still alive. The remaining 7 people, under Zhang Hai's attack, were swept away like a whirlwind, instantly falling to the ground. After all, the other party took the initiative to look for trouble, and they were also armed. Zhang Hai wasn't going to be soft-hearted. Although it was the same as the last time, it was a deadly blow, but it was definitely not light. These people who were hit in the face were destined to be covered in blood. Their nose bones and facial bones would definitely be broken. Zhang Hai didn't hold back too much even if he hit them in other positions, although he didn't hit them to the extent of rupturing their internal organs. However, with his immense strength, it was not a problem for him to break some bones. At the very least, he had to ensure that they completely lost their ability to fight. Of course, after this battle, these guys would probably have to lie in the hospital for at least a month. The people who had been knocked down by Zhang Hai lay on the ground and covered their wounds. However, they didn't curse. They just covered their wounds and let out low growls. I didn't expect them to be tough guys. Looking at these people, Zhang Hai tidied up his clothes and said softly. At this time, the people who were first thrown by Zhang Hai, the 4 people who had weapons in their hands, also got up. It was so lively just now, but in fact, Zhang Hai only took about 10 seconds to deal with these people. After all, Zhang Hai's speed was not ordinary. When he dealt with these people, the people on the other side had just gotten up. This time, only facing these 4 guys, Zhang Hai felt a lot more confident in his heart. However, the weapons in their hands would always be a little troublesome, so he rushed over first and kicked away the switchblade in a guy's hand. At the same time, he stepped on the wrist of a person who hadn't gotten up yet. The huge force instantly broke the bones of this person's hand. This time, not to mention the switchblade, he couldn't pick up anything else. But even if his wrist was broken, this person just trembled and opened his mouth wide, but he didn't make a scream. Looking at this scene, Zhang Hai felt a little creepy. But at this time, it was not the time to care about these things. He turned around and gave the tough guy under his foot a kick. The tough guy slid back with the help of the ice and blocked the way of a person. He then stuck to the person who was stabbing at him with a switchblade. It could be seen that this guy really wanted to fight to the death with Zhang Hai. Generally speaking, if one didn't want to die in a street scuffle, it was more of a scaring effect than a weapon. Even if there was an accidental cut, it would only be a bloody wound on the body. It was an external injury. Unless there was excessive blood loss, it was easy to treat. However, this guy really wanted to kill Zhang Hai because his action was to stab. As long as this knife pierced into the body, whether it hurt the heart, liver, spleen, lungs or kidney, it would be fatal. Even if it only cut the intestines, it would still be fatal. It could be seen that this person didn't think too much at this time. Since they were playing around and trying to kill, Zhang Hai wouldn't be polite. Well, in fact, Zhang Hai was the one who dug out the eyeballs first. But humans always like to blame others. Zhang Hai was also a human, so naturally he was also like this. Looking at the dagger coming at him, Zhang Hai's body dodged. At the same time, his right hand stretched out like lightning and grabbed the person's wrist. Then he used brute force. The huge force directly twisted the man's arm like a fried dough twist. Zhang Hai used force and directly sent the dagger back into the man's body. The moment the switchblade entered the man's flesh, The man's eyes instantly widened. He looked at Zhang Hai with a face of disbelief. Then, he used his other hand to cover his wound. His whole body trembled as he knelt down, but he still didn't scream. Seeing the man fall, Zhang Hai glanced at the blood on his hand. Originally, he thought that the man would be very scared and even run away. But his consciousness didn't feel this way. Instead, he calmly shook the blood on his hand. Although this was the first time he fought so fiercely, he didn't seem to be disgusted by it. It seemed like he didn't feel anything when he killed someone because of this. This made Zhang Hai's brows wrinkle. This kind of feeling made his liver tremble. His future path was to become a homicidal maniac. If this was the case, then it was really not good. But fortunately, he knew that even if he had such thoughts, it wasn't the time to think about it now. After all, he was still in the middle of a battle. On the nearby wall, Zhang Hai wiped the blood on his hand. Then, he looked at the last person who was still standing. He was also the last person holding a weapon. At this time, the sky was gradually getting dark, but his vision was still not affected. This person saw that his 12 companions were all lying down in a flash. He was also trembling in fear. The knife in his hand clearly couldn't provide him any sense of security. His whole body was trembling like a sieve. His eyes were full of fear. He clearly didn't exercise much, but the sweat on his forehead had already gathered into a stream. His face, which was already very dirty, was now even dirtier. "You're the only one left. Why aren't you coming up?" Raising his head, Zhang Hai looked at him casually and asked faintly. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the man looked around in horror. In fact, if there was space now, he would have run away. But unfortunately at this time, the door here was tightly shut, and the wall behind him was also sealed. He really didn't know what to do. He didn't want to be beaten, but now it seemed that it was impossible not to be beaten. Catch him, catch him, catch him, catch him. Just when he was extremely frightened, a sudden ear-piercing alarm rang from afar. Then, under the lead of an F-650, 2 police cars quickly arrived in front of the alley. As the 3 cars stopped, 4 police officers and Xueqi Clive jumped out of the cars and ran into the small alley. Seeing the police arrive, the person here didn't say anything. He directly threw the knife in his hand far away, then habitually squatted down with his hands on his head. Seeing his shameless behavior, Zhang Hai couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. How proactive. The person inside, squat down and put your hands on your head. But soon, Zhang Hai knew that it was not a good thing to not take the initiative at this time, because the 4 police officers had also walked into the small alley at this time. When they saw the people on the ground with their faces full of blood, broken arms, and confused, they had already pulled out their guns and shouted at Zhang Hai, who was still standing in the small alley with a righteous face. "Is there a mistake? I'm the victim." Hearing the words of these police officers, Zhang Hai said to them with some dissatisfaction. "I'll say it again, put your hands on your head, squat down now, right now." However, the police officers obviously didn't give Zhang Hai a chance to explain and directly said loudly. Looking at the black muzzles in front of him, Zhang Hai's heart flashed with a trace of dissatisfaction. It was the first time that someone pointed a gun at him directly, but he knew that this was not the time to test whether his body could withstand a bullet, so he still held his head and squatted down. After Zhang Hai also squatted down, 3 of the 4 police officers quickly ran over. One of them pointed a gun at the guy who confronted Zhang Hai just now, one pointed a gun at Zhang Hai, and the other one checked the situation of the people lying on the ground. The last police officer who didn't come over was contacting the ambulance while looking at SH-20 Clive at the same time. However, SH-20 Clive was a teacher after all, and she knew the law. At this time, she didn't panic, but after the man contacted the ambulance and reinforcements, she explained her and Zhang Hai's situation. After learning that Zhang Hai was indeed the victim, the police came over and said a few words to the police officer who pointed a gun at Zhang Hai. Then the police officer put away the gun in his hand. After putting away the gun, the police officer helped Zhang Hai up and said with a serious face, "Sir, I'm sorry, this is our duty. Please come back to the police station with us later. We need to record your statement." Chapter 133. Sorry, I'm late. Lawyer Moses went to Miami today. He's on his way back now, so he asked me to handle this case first. As the office door opened, Penelope Daller, who had met Zhang Hai once, walked in from outside. 4. Moses Adams. Although Zhang Hai did not have any company acquisition proposals, nor did he have any international lawsuits to fight, such a rich person was still his high-quality customer. Logically speaking, as long as Zhang Hai needed it, he would immediately appear in front of Zhang Hai. Unfortunately, he wanted to appear in front of Zhang Hai immediately, but the flight did not allow it. Before Zhang Hai went to the police station, he called Moses Adams. After learning that he was in Miami, Zhang Hai wanted to change lawyers, but Moses said that he would come back immediately. Sometimes, Zhang Hai cared too much about his reputation, so he did not say anything and was directly taken into the office by the police. Fortunately, when the police learned of Zhang Hai's identity and determined that Zhang Hai was someone they couldn't afford to offend, their attitude towards Zhang Hai was still very good. They didn't need to sit outside to record the statement, so they specifically left an empty office for Zhang Hai. There was also hot coffee to drink. Although the coffee was instant, in this cold weather, having a cup of hot coffee could make people feel a little better. After asking about what happened today, the police went out to deal with it. As for Zhang Hai and Xueqi Clive, they temporarily stayed there. The two of them needed to be completely sure that this matter had nothing to do with Zhang Hai before they could leave. The two of them were bored, so they just sat there and watched the NBA on the TV in the office. Fortunately, although Xueqi Clive was not a fan, he still had some understanding of this thing. The two of them talked and laughed, and they had a good time. Meanwhile, at Zhang Hai's home, Zhang Hai had already asked Mrs. Philemon to go to his house to prepare dinner. After learning that Xueqi Clive's father was a French chef, he did not need to show off. He just needed to make these things taste the same. No matter how gorgeous they were, they could not be more gorgeous than French food, right? When Penelope came in, Zhang Hai and Xueqi Clive were talking about the Celtics' hopes for this year's playoffs. When she came in, the two of them were really shocked, but after greeting them, Penelope got to the point. It's nothing. This is not a big case. Maybe I was too harsh. When he heard Penelope's words, Zhang Hai smiled and touched the tip of his nose. To be honest, Zhang Hai also felt a little awkward when he saw Penelope. After all, she was not an ordinary lawyer. Even if she did not have a good relationship with her father was still Zhang Hai's subordinate. Therefore, when he saw this familiar face, it was difficult for him to order her around like he did Moses Adams. It's good that you're fine. I'll go and understand the situation first. Because she had come in a hurry, she had only received the facts that Moses Adams had told her on the way there. She was not very clear about the specific situation, so she had to go and understand it now. Zhang Hai did not care about this. He gestured for Penelope to go ahead, and then Penelope left. Zhang Hai and Xueqi Clive continued to sit there and watch TV. When the night's game was about to end, the policeman who had brought them in came in with Penelope. However, Penelope's eyes were a little red, which made Zhang Hai a little puzzled. Mr. Zhang Hai, we have understood your situation. You can leave now. Looking at Zhang Hai, the policeman first came up and shook his hand. Then he smiled kindly and said to Zhang Hai, "This incident was actually very easy to pinpoint. After the police reinforcements arrived, the place was searched and everyone was arrested. Those who should be sent to the hospital were sent to the hospital. Those who were lightly injured, and those women, were all arrested and sent to the police station. In fact, this incident was not difficult to understand as long as it was investigated." Zhang Hai did not know these people before this. He had come out to play today. Xueqi Clive's wallet was stolen, and there was also a surveillance camera. Zhang Hai chased the thief and was led to that place. Those people took out switchblades, which was also true. Zhang Hai, to put it bluntly, was just self-defense. At the same time, there was no disability or death. This was not excessive self-defense. So no matter what, it would not be Zhang Hai's responsibility. Even the police had nothing to say. "Thank you, then we will go first." Hearing that he could leave, Zhang Hai also smiled and shook hands with the policeman. Although it was very warm in the police station, to be honest, ordinary people were not willing to come here for nothing. Now that he heard that he could leave, Zhang Hai did not hesitate and was ready to leave directly. As for the unfinished football game, it was not important. As for Xueqi Clive, her thoughts were the same as Zhang Hai's. Who would be willing to come to the police station for nothing? Phew, today was a day of fun, betting, arresting people, and in the end, I ended up in the police station. It's a bit unlucky. Hee hee, but fortunately, it settled satisfactorily. Dinner is ready at my manor. Miss Clive, let's go. By the way, Miss Dale, come with us. Thank you for coming over so late. I'll treat you to dinner. After saying goodbye to the police, Zhang Hai and others walked out of the police station. Zhang Hai took a long breath. This is the free air. Cough. I was originally free. However, staying in the police station, it really felt that the air there was about to solidify, which was very uncomfortable. That, sir. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Penelope, who was still hesitating, couldn't help but slow down her pace. As if she had made up her mind, she raised her head and said to Zhang Hai, Hearing her words, Zhang Hai, who was still thinking about steak and lobster, couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then he turned his head curiously and looked at her. Is she going to refuse my invitation? Sir, can you please not sue those people? Seeing Zhang Hai's doubtful eyes, Penelope seemed to have made up her mind. She looked into Zhang Hai's eyes and said word by word. What do you mean? As a lawyer, the last thing they can't have is their own heart. They exist to serve their clients. Of course, sometimes they need to give better advice to some people, but sometimes, especially when facing people like Zhang Hai, who is not sure of money at all, the most important goal is to vent his anger for him or fight for his interests. Just like Moses Adams, no matter what the town hall or the town's police chief was like, he didn't give in. He didn't relent in the slightest. He only gave Zhang Hai the things he collected when Zhang Hai was a little shaken. As for what to do, it was still up to Zhang Hai to decide. He always knew who was the boss and who was the employee. For a good lawyer, things like pity didn't exist from the beginning. Since he was standing in front of Zhang Hai, as his lawyer, he had to do everything according to Zhang Hai's instructions. This was a good lawyer, not a person with a strong sense of morality who went against his own lawyer for others. You could call them cold-blooded or shameless, but only such lawyers were truly good lawyers. Although it was wrong to look at it from the perspective of human nature and morality, did this world talk about these things? So Penelope's words made Zhang Hai a little unhappy. Originally, because she was an acquaintance, his mood changed a little. He frowned and looked at her as he asked, they? Sigh, sir, they are actually a group of pitiful people. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, although she felt a little guilty about Zhang Hai's questioning, Penelope Daly still braced herself and said, These children are actually deaf and mute. After hesitating for a moment, Penelope whispered to Zhang Hai. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai, who was originally very unhappy, was stunned for a moment. Originally, he was still thinking, why are these guys so unyielding? It turned out that this was the reason why no one screamed when they were beaten up like that. Hearing Penelope's words, Zhang Hai's heart stirred, but it was quickly extinguished. Yes, some congenital defects were indeed pitiful, but this could not be a reason for them to commit crimes. What's more, these people wanted to kill him, which was absolutely not allowed. If a person with a defect worked hard, he would be praised all over the world. But if they only took advantage of this to commit crimes, no matter what others thought, at least Zhang Hai absolutely disapproved of it in his heart. A pitiful person must have a hateful side. At the very least, before fully understanding the course of events, one should not jump to conclusions. Not to mention, in such an incident, Zhang Hai appeared as a victim. This can't be a reason for them to commit crimes. Zhang Hai had always been like this. So after listening to Penelope's words, Zhang Hai said stiffly. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Penelope's face became a little ugly. As for Xueqi Clive, if she were a bystander, she might pity these people, but she was the one who was robbed. And she just saw with her own eyes that the switchblades were used as evidence. Those things were not toys, and they would indeed die if they were stabbed. She thought that she was not a saint who would take other people's lives as a product of pity. She couldn't, and Zhang Hai couldn't. This was a matter of principle and couldn't be changed. Chapter 134. Are you really going to sue them? Sitting in the passenger seat of the pickup truck, Xueqi Clive hesitated and said to Zhang Hai. Hearing her words, although she didn't say it clearly, Zhang Hai also knew what she was talking about. After Penelope told him about the situation of those people, Zhang Hai was indeed a little angry at the time, but now that he thought about it, he was really helpless. If he didn't sue them, he would be angry, but if he did sue them, they wouldn't be able to pay for it. At most, they would be locked up, which would not benefit him. The most important thing was that if he really sued them, it would give others the illusion that he was bullying these people. This was something that Zhang Hai didn't want to do. I don't know, let's not think about it for the time being. These people seem to have committed more than 1 or 2 crimes. They should have done this kind of thing many times. Maybe after the police interrogate them, the police won't let them go even if I don't sue them. Let's not think about it for now. Let's go eat first, I'm starving to death. After being silent for a long time, Zhang Hai decided to put aside his hesitation for the time being. He had to deal with tonight's dinner first. Good idea. Hearing that Zhang Hai hadn't made up his mind, Xueqi Clive also knew that it was meaningless to say anything at this time. Not to mention Zhang Hai, if she let these people go, she would actually be a little unhappy in her heart. Since she couldn't make this decision, she would wait until later. Then, the conversation between the two of them returned to how it was before this incident had happened. Zhang Hai's F-650 quickly drove out of the downtown area of Boston and rushed in the direction of Winthrop. Because it was already past 7 o'clock in the evening, there might be some traffic on the road in the city center, but the highway in this city had passed their peak hour. Zhang Hai could drive here at the maximum speed on the road that had been cleared. It would have taken more than an hour to get there, but he rushed back to his manor before 8 o'clock. The gate of the manor was rebuilt after Zhang Hai took over the manor. Although it looked very ordinary, it actually had an automatic authentication system. When Zhang Hai came in, he only needed to scan his face. Of course, there was also a triple lock and password switch. In Zhang Hai's house, except for the workers' room, the rooms in his villa were basically double-locked. Usually, they could be opened with a password. If there was no password, they had to open with a key. Of course, the door could also be locked from the inside, but it had to be inside the room. As the gate slowly opened, Zhang Hai's car also slowly drove into the manor. When his car stopped in front of his villa, the gate of his villa was also opened. Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang quickly ran out of the villa. On top of Xiao Bai's head was the snow squirrel that Zhang Hai had brought back from the forest, Dai Ya. The 2 dogs and 1 squirrel quickly ran in front of Zhang Hai's car and roared at Zhang Hai's car. This gave Xueqi Clive, who was about to get out of the car, a fright. After all, anyone who saw these 2 huge beasts would not let down their guard easily. His hand was already on the door handle, but when he saw the 2 dogs, he could not open the door. Go, go, go. Go and play somewhere else. Don't worry, they won't bite. They are welcoming us. Zhang Hai turned around and saw the fear in Xueqi Clive's heart. He immediately got out of the car and kicked Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai's buttocks to chase them away. At the same time, he explained to Xueqi Clive. Xueqi Clive was stunned when she heard Zhang Hai's words. Then, she saw that the 2 dogs really ran to the side after being kicked away by Zhang Hai. They stopped barking and did not seem to be aggressive. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief. She knew that a manor owner like Zhang Hai would raise dogs, and he would raise quite a few of them. After all, herding cows required the help of cattle dogs. Although her family had never raised a dog before, she was already mentally prepared. After getting out of the car, Xueqi Clive was still looking at the 2 dogs. To be honest, ever since the 2 dogs followed Zhang Hai, they ate well and lived well. Most importantly, Zhang Hai had used his blood to transform them. Not only did their intelligence increase, but their size also increased. The Caucasian Mastiff and the Green Wolf Mastiff, which were originally large dogs, seemed to have grown bigger after being nourished for a few months. The Green Wolf Mastiff in particular looked more and more like a wolf, but it was bigger than a wolf. Even if it was compared to the largest North American gray wolf on Earth, it was still bigger than the North American gray wolf. Its claws and fangs could not be seen normally, but when it stood up, it was indeed a little scary. As for the Caucasian Xiao Bai, it was more than half a size bigger than the Green Wolf Mastiff. Although it was not as fierce, at least in terms of weight and size, the current Xiao Bai was more intimidating than Xiao Huang. Their fur was glossy and soft, and there was no strange smell on their bodies. If someone who knew dogs was here, they would realize that these 2 dogs were really good dogs. Even their front teeth had changed a lot over the past few days. Not only had they grown bigger, but their fur had also become much softer. Zhang Hai was a little worried. It was still a squirrel, but if it continued to grow, it would become a mink. Speaking of which, It was the smartest of the three little guys. As soon as it saw Xueqi get out of the car, it rolled its eyes and jumped down from Xiao Bai's head. Then it quickly climbed up Xueqi's foot and rubbed against her palm. Wow, little cutie, what's its name? Sure enough, women's resistance to cute things wasn't high. Under the attack of the front teeth, Xueqi said with a face full of surprise. It's called front teeth. Okay, let's go in first. Seeing that Xueqi's eyes lit up when she saw the front teeth, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile and shake his head. This guy's IQ developed really quickly. He was already trying to please the people around him. And okay. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang stood up first and led the two into the villa. As soon as they entered the villa, a hot wind blew in their faces. Zhang Hai and Sandy couldn't help but take a deep breath. Although it was very warm in the car, it was because of the air conditioner. When the air conditioner was turned on, there was no way to open the windows. Fortunately, Zhang Hai didn't smoke, so the air in the car was passable, but it was definitely not good. When they got out of the car, although the air was good, it was too cold. This time, when they entered the house, the air was good and warm. Zhang Hai was a northerner. Northerners were actually more afraid of the cold than southerners because there was no heating in the south. In winter, the southerners were still fine because the temperature was more than 10 degrees. But the people in the Central Plains and Sichuan were much worse. The temperature outside was 2 or 3 degrees. And the temperature inside the house was also 2 or 3 degrees. It was really unbearable. Although Boston belonged to the northern region in terms of latitude and longitude, because it was close to the Atlantic Ocean, it was considered an oceanic climate. Therefore, the temperature here in winter wasn't particularly cold. Ordinary people, in order to save some air, would turn on the heater in winter and let the temperature reach about 10 degrees to get through the winter. This was also the reason why in many American movies, the actors had to wear sweaters and woolen clothes in the house. Of course, there were also environmental protection organizations that said that this was to save energy and reduce emissions. But Zhang Hai didn't know the specifics. He only knew that he was very afraid of the cold, so in this winter, his villa was turned on 24 hours a day, and the temperature was very high, constant at 24 degrees. As for the air conditioner, it wouldn't work if it was -7 degrees, so he had to rely on it? Then he would freeze to death. Wow, your house is really warm. As soon as they entered Zhang Hai's villa, Xueqi whispered. At the same time, his eyes were also looking at the villa in front of him. Zhang Hai's decoration was very good in the eyes of ordinary people. At least, the things he could buy were more expensive in the market. Although there weren't any treasures, when he walked in, he would still be amazed. Of course, there was no way to compare with those real rich people. Moreover, Zhang Hai wasn't very willing to spend money on antiques. It was true that he had 300 million yuan, but it was all spent on this manor. Before the manor had enough output, he didn't need to consider these things. Give me your coat, I'll hang it up for you. Change your shoes here. While Xueqi was looking at Zhang Hai's villa, Zhang Hai had already taken off his coat and walked over with a pair of slippers that no one had ever seen before. There's no other way, I don't have a woman here, so I only have men's slippers. Seeing Xanthi strangely looking at the pair of gray slippers in his hand, Zhang Hai shrugged and said to her, Hee, it's okay. Looking at Zhang Hai's appearance, Xueqi also laughed, then took off his coat and handed it to Zhang Hai, then changed into the slippers. At this time, a figure came out from the kitchen in the distance. Hey boss, you're finally back. If you didn't come back, the steak would have been cold. Haha, little girl from the Clive family. You're in luck today. This is the beef that our boss treasured, and the lobster that Ai Dehua just caught today. As soon as the figure saw Zhang Hai, his mouth began to chatter. Hearing this voice, Zhang Hai didn't need to look at his face to know that it was Philemon. In Zhang Hai's manner, Zhang Hai didn't know who was the best cook, but he had recently gotten used to eating Mrs. Philemon's food. Therefore, before Zhang Hai left today, he also asked Mrs. Philemon to prepare dinner for him. It seemed that Mrs. Philemon was forced to come by his wife, but it also showed that Mrs. Philemon valued this meal very much. Chapter 135. This is steak. Take your time, there's plenty more. When Zhang Hai and Xueqi arrived at the dining room, they imagined that there would be red wine, candles, whips and so on. Cough. It seemed like there was something strange mixed in. But we can ignore it for the time being, because there was no such thing. Everything was still the same as before, but there was a new white tablecloth on the table. The more Zhang Hai looked at it, the more he felt that it was similar to a curtain in the villa. But before he could confirm it, Philip and Mrs. Philip had already served dinner. Eating in Zhang Hai's home was destined to be a place that wasn't particular about food. There weren't any particular people here, whether it was cowboys or fishermen, they all came and went roughly, so the things they cooked were also rough. There were a total of 4 large plates and a pot. Inside the pot was a cheddar soup, the most famous soup in Boston. Among the 4 large plates, there was a huge lobster on one of them. It seemed that this was Robin's harvest today. Zhang Hai looked at the lobster. It was about 16 or 17 pounds. Although it was not the king of lobsters, it was definitely one of the biggest lobsters. In addition to this huge lobster, there was also a plate of grilled steak. In other Western restaurants, steak was eaten in pieces, but in Zhang Hai's restaurant, it was eaten in plates. On the other 2 plates, there was a pile of salad made of vegetables and fruits, and on the other, there was a freshly baked bread. Although the arrangement was not particular, it made people feel that it was very realistic. Perhaps for some people, doing this is disrespectful to them, but Zhang Hai doesn't care. Because there was no need for him to make friends with such people. To put it bluntly, he was still a nouveau riche. He didn't care about what others thought of him. He only cared about whether he was comfortable or not, that was all. Uncle Turner, Aunt Turner, you should also join us. Xanthi Clive stood up and said politely to the 2 of them when she saw the Philmonts carrying out the 5 large plates. No need. Don't you see what time it is now? We've already finished eating. You guys take your time. Hearing her words, Mrs. Philemon laughed. In fact, they were all from the same small town, so they were very clear about Clive's family situation. Generally speaking, this family was not bad. His father used to be a chef. His culinary skills were not bad, and his temper was not bad. Her mother was an ordinary housewife. After Xueqi Clive graduated from university, she returned to the town's primary school to be a teacher. In fact, she could have found a better job, but she still returned to her hometown, Winthrop. Therefore, the people in the small town had a good impression of this family because of their work at Xueqi Clive. Seeing that their boss had brought this girl back, they felt that there might be something going on between the 2 of them. If Zhang Hai knew what they were thinking, he would probably be stunned for a moment, because it seemed that, probably, he had no intention of pursuing Xanthi Clive. Well, it didn't count when he was sleeping, at least he didn't have such intentions when he was conscious. Okay then, be careful when you go back. Seeing that the Philemons decided not to stay and be a third wheel, Cindy Clive smiled and sent the 2 of them back. This made Zhang Hai, who originally wanted to eat immediately after coming back, feel too embarrassed to use his knife and fork. Instead, he followed Cindy Clive and sent the 2 of them out of the house before returning to the dining room. Let's start eating now. Looking at the food on the table, Zhang Hai rubbed his mouth, licked his lips subconsciously, and said seriously. Seeing his appearance, Xanthi Clive couldn't help but chuckle. She felt more and more that Zhang Hai was very interesting. Then she took the initiative to sit opposite Zhang Hai, picked up a piece of steak, and put it on Zhang Hai's plate. Zhang Hai, who originally wanted to directly eat, couldn't help but stare blankly. Then he picked the largest piece of steak and put it on Xanthi Clive's plate. Seeing Zhang Hai's choice, Xanthi Clive couldn't help but laugh and roll her eyes. What are you looking at? Eat. Unfortunately, this flirtatious supercilious look was like playing the lute to a cow in front of Zhang Hai. When Zhang Hai saw that she was only looking at him without eating, he said directly to her. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xanthi Clive also smiled. She picked up her knife and fork and cut a piece of steak that looked a little cold. In fact, as a woman, a beautiful woman, she didn't eat much. To be honest, the 3 most important things about food were its color, aroma, and taste. First of all, there was no need to consider the color of the steak made by Mrs. Philip. Because Zhang Hai only ate fully cooked steak, this piece of steak was almost like a piece of charred meat. There was no beauty in it at all. Second, the aroma. Because it was a little cold, it didn't smell very fragrant. Last but not least, the taste. Although Xueqi Clive hadn't tasted it, she felt that if the color and aroma of the steak weren't the best, the taste wouldn't be too good either. Although Zhang Hai was a rich man and had 20,000 cows, Xueqi Clive didn't raise any cows at home. However, she knew very well that it wasn't easy for a cow to raise premium grade A beef. However, raising a cow by itself required a lot of attention to detail and was very troublesome. After all, Xueqi Clive had worked in a Western restaurant before. Therefore, she had more or less attended ranchers who specialized in raising premium grade A beef. Basically, to raise such a cow, the number of cowboys and not the size of the pasture was determined. A cowboy who worked more than 10 hours a day could at most raise 3 such cows. That way, the meat of the cow would have a perfect marbling pattern. Otherwise, why would a pound of usable beef be sold for $3, while this cow was sold for $300? That was why it was expensive. However, Zhang Hai obviously wasn't like that. Therefore, she guessed that Zhang Hai's so-called marbling pattern cow was either a bluff from Luo Binci and the others, or he himself didn't know much about it. Regarding this, she wasn't very familiar with Zhang Hai yet, so it wasn't easy for her to say. But in any case, Zhang Hai's hospitality to her was a kind gesture. Moreover, he also said that the beef had a marbled pattern, so it was estimated that there was a premium grade. This kind of beef was not cheap. At least, as a teacher in a small town, even if she wanted to eat it every day, she still couldn't afford it, so she was prepared to try it. When her fork touched Zhang Hai's steak, the moment the knife gently cut it open, she couldn't help but feel surprised. Because the feeling of the steak being cut open was very strange. This feeling was really similar to the feeling she had when she secretly ate her father's steak in that French restaurant. It was similar to the feeling she had when she secretly ate her father's steak. There was no trace of tendon in the meat. It was completely the firmness of the beef itself. When the knife cut open the muscle fibers on both sides, the feeling was really difficult to describe in words. Was it a waste of strength? No, but was it easy to cut? It didn't seem to be. Just as she was feeling a little strange, the knife had already cut off the small piece of beef. She subconsciously put it into her mouth with a fork. The moment the slightly burnt piece of beef entered her mouth, the thick taste of beef juice spread in her mouth. As she gently bit down with her teeth, the elastic feeling of the muscle fibers being bitten off instantly, the thick beef juice hidden in the piece of meat, and the oily feeling of the marble flowers piled up by the fat instantly exploded at this moment. Her jaw moved almost uncontrollably, constantly chewing that piece of beef in her mouth. Excellent, absolutely excellent grade A beef. While her mouth was constantly tasting this delicious food, her brain was also constantly telling her that this thing was real, the taste of this thing was real. Zhang Hai did not lie to her, or it could be said that he was not deceived. He really did have a special grade A beef cow. At this time, she finally understood why Zhang Hai would be so arrogant as to make a bet with the people from the Cartwright Company. Really, in front of a special grade A beef cow, unless it was the top Japanese beef cow, all other beef cows would only have the fate of being blown to pieces. The original hesitation about the color, fragrance, and taste had been thrown to the back of her mind at this time. When she finally reacted, the large piece of steak in front of her had already entered her stomach. At this moment, when she looked at the plate of burnt beef again, she felt that it was no longer a plate of beef, but a plate of dollars. She subconsciously picked up the fork, put another piece on her plate, and then began to eat. You'll get tired of eating beef all the time. Come, have some lobster. If you like it, you can take some back later. Just when she was trying her best to eat the second piece of steak in front of her, a huge lobster claw stretched in front of her, and then Zhang Hai's voice came from the opposite side. Xueqi Clive looked up and saw Zhang Hai gnawing on a claw. In fact, whether it was eating crabs or lobsters, they all had their own tools, but Zhang Hai didn't have the patience and leisure to do so. He ate these things violently. Anyway, he had plenty of strength. As for eating elegantly, it had nothing to do with him. She looked up and smiled at Zhang Hai a little embarrassedly, then took the claw from him. Only now did she remember that she looked a little ugly when she was eating the steak. After all, she was a girl, so she couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. She lowered her head and bit a piece of the claw that Zhang Hai handed to her. Fortunately, Zhang Hai had already pried the claw open. You don't have to take it away. Your steak is really delicious. No wonder you have the confidence to make a bet with Cartwright Company. You know, as long as 1% of the meat produced by your cattle is this grade of beef, you won't have to worry about the sales of your beef cattle. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi Clive temporarily got rid of the awkwardness and said seriously to Zhang Hai, 1%? Haha, it's okay. You can eat as much of this beef as you want. If you can't finish it, you can take it all away. I have a lot of fresh beef of this grade here. No one eats the finished ones, so I basically fed it to the dogs. But obviously, they prefer to eat it raw. Shrugging his shoulders, although his words were somewhat hurtful, Zhang Hai was indeed telling the truth. Chapter 137. Let's do it here, good night. The F-650 roared as it stopped in front of a house in Winthrop Town. SH-20 Clive jumped out of the car. Naturally, this time, Zhang Hai also jumped out of the car. Looking at the beautiful girl carrying 2 bags of beef, Zhang Hai couldn't help but hesitate. But Sandy was much more straightforward. Oh, okay, if you want to eat beef or fish, you can come to my place, I have enough. Hearing Sandy's words, Zhang Hai chuckled and said to her. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Sandy smiled even more happily. She now couldn't understand Zhang Hai, this big boy. Speaking of which, Zhang Hai's age should be about the same as hers, but his shy personality didn't seem like a 27-year-old adult. If SH-20 Clive didn't see his appearance, she would even think that he was just a 17-year-old young man. Sometimes, his thoughts and actions didn't seem like an adult's actions. Zhang Hai could swear that he was indeed an adult, but in terms of mentality, he was indeed a little immature. But there was no other way. In fact, in China, nearly 70% of people as old as Zhang Hai didn't match their age. They were a lot younger. They didn't know how to take care of others when they went out, and they had some unrealistic dreams. They didn't calculate how much money they spent, and they did things based more on hot-bloodedness, etc. Those who had such characteristics could be said to be people who hadn't grown up. Originally, Zhang Hai should have had an opportunity to become stronger, and that was his parents' death. At that time, if he was alone, maybe he would have become more mature, but the appearance of his wife made him fall into a fantasy. But now, although the fantasy was shattered, it wasn't easy for his character to become more mature. If he wanted to become more mature, he had to take a blow. But in the current situation, what blow could he take? He didn't play with investment and financial management. He only played with business. He didn't have any rich friends. Were you sure he would be afraid of fighting and kidnapping? A person like him who couldn't even jump badges and stayed at home all day long. How could he take a blow? But this kind of character was a good character for others. For example, SH-20 Clive. For her, it was good to make friends with such a person. First of all, Zhang Hai wouldn't cheat her, right? As for the future, she would think about it. At least for now, she didn't think that she would have any development with Zhang Hai. After all, from the first time they met until now, they had only met 4 times. Even if the United States was a more open country, it wouldn't be so fast. Well, then I'll go first. Hearing Zhang Hai's promise, SH-20 Clive chuckled, then waved to Zhang Hai, turned around, and walked into the villa behind her. But as soon as she entered the door, she found that in the living room, 3 pairs of eyes were looking at her. Feeling such gazes, SH-20 Clive waved her hand a little awkwardly. You guys haven't slept yet. Looking at the 3 people in front of her, SH-20 Clive broke the silence first. I'll take the things to the kitchen first. You guys talk first. Hearing his daughter's words, SH-20 Clive's father, old Clive, stood up first. It wasn't appropriate for him to say this kind of thing. Although his wife wasn't Sandy's biological mother, the mother and daughter got along well over the years, so it was better for them to ask about this matter. Well, okay. After handing the bag inside to her father, SH-20 Clive hung the coat on the hanger by the door. Compared with Zhang Hai's home, which was 24 degrees all year round, Sandy's home was much colder, only 12 or 13 degrees. After taking off the coat, it was a little cold, but fortunately, she was used to it. Knowing that this matter couldn't be avoided, she took the initiative to go to the sofa in the guest room, picked up the TV, and changed the channel. Sister, did you go out with that guy all day today? Oh, cake seller. Did you go to the hotel? When SH-20 Clive sat down, her sister, Karma Cliff, who had met Zhang Hai once, asked excitedly. Hearing her words, Sandy couldn't help but roll her eyes. Are high school students nowadays so direct? How is it possible? I just took him around Boston. He has been here for so long, but he hasn't visited Boston yet. I'm a tour guide today, a tour guide. Rolling her eyes at her little sister, Xueqi explained. Hey, how is it possible? How can there be a tour guide as beautiful as sister? Did he touch you? You came back so late. What did you do? Hearing Sh20's words, Karma Cliff obviously didn't believe it and kept asking. You are really gossipy. You are so imaginative. Why don't you write novels? Looking at her sister with some amusement, Sh20 said to her angrily. Hearing Sh20's words, Karma couldn't help but hesitate. Was she wrong? But looking at her sister's appearance, such a beautiful woman, she doesn't believe that Zhonghai won't be tempted. Well, Karma, don't bother your sister, Sandy. Although I am not your biological mother, I have been teaching you as my own daughter over the years. Now you are an adult, and you are not young. You are 26 years old this year. If you really meet the right one, you should consider it. I think the young man just now is good. I heard from Karma that his economic conditions are also very good. Although our family doesn't want his money, this is basic. If you have feelings for him, you can try and give him some opportunities. Patting Karma's thigh, Xanthi's stepmother looked at Xanthi and said seriously. There was a good saying, if there was a stepmother, there would be a stepfather. In this world, there were many vicious stepmothers. However, Sandy's fate is good. Her stepmother is still very good to her, and she and Karma are 9 years apart. So when she was almost sensible, Karma was born. The age gap between the two is a lot, and the things needed at each age are different. This may also be the reason why there are no other contradictions in this family. Mom, you really think too much. I really only met him 4 times. If he hadn't donated $60,000 to our school to build the school building, I wouldn't have accompanied him to Boston. Looking at her mother with a dumbfounded expression, Xueqi said clearly, but at the same time, Zhonghai's figure kept appearing in her mind today. From the silly boy who got up in the morning, to the confident man in the afternoon, to the master who fought with more than a dozen people in order to retrieve his wallet at night, and the beef at night. It's really hard to say what she feels about Zhonghai, but now she can be sure that she has some good feelings about him, but that is only limited to friends. But then again, she seems to have forgotten something. It seems to be beef. Yes, beef. Just as she was recalling what happened today, a scream came from the kitchen in the distance. When the mother and daughters heard this scream, they immediately thought that something bad had happened and quickly ran to the kitchen. But when they arrived in the kitchen, they found that their father and husband were holding their big bald heads with both hands, looking at the beef in the plastic bag in front of them with horror. Yes, although Zhonghai's words were a bit annoying. But as the daughter of a chef, Sandy couldn't watch this good meat fall into the dog's mouth, so in the end, she took the rest of the beef away. Little Yellow and Xiao Bai didn't say anything about this. Just like what Zhonghai said, these two guys prefer to eat raw, not cooked, and it seems that they have become more and more wild recently. But for Zhonghai, this beef that dogs don't like to eat is a supreme delicacy in the eyes of humans. Super A, top-grade frost snow beef. It's actually made like this. This is unforgivable. Looking at the leftover steaks in front of him, Sandy's father picked up a piece and said with a sad face, which made him feel even more distressed than cutting off a piece of his meat. It's not necessary, Dad, you're too evil. Isn't it just beef? Hearing her father's roar, Karma, who didn't know much about this, scratched her head strangely. Not long after she could remember, Sandy's father had stopped cooking in the Western restaurant, so even if she had tasted top-grade beef when she was young, she wouldn't remember. In her opinion, all beef was about the same. It's not that bad. How can you say it's not that bad? This state and this distribution of fat is clearly something that only top-grade frost beef can have. I still remember seeing this kind of beef in a Japanese restaurant a long time ago. At that time, I was also shocked. The distribution of fat on the meat was like a beautiful picture scroll. It was mesmerizing. Do you know how much this kind of beef can be sold for in New York? $400 a pound. But what are you making now? This is simply a crime, a reckless waste of God's gift. Hearing his daughter's words, Clive almost jumped up in anger. Grabbing the steak in his hand, he said with an intoxicated look. Hearing his words, his wife and Cliff were both stunned. How could a piece of beef be so expensive? It's okay, this is just what we're eating tonight. There's another piece beside it that he gave me. It hasn't been cooked yet. Hearing her father's words, Xueqi muttered in her heart, "As I guessed, this is indeed a top-grade steak. It's just that Mrs. Turner ruined it." Thinking of this, she immediately told her father that she had brought a piece of raw steak. Chapter 138. Ignoring Xueqi's father, Jiang Hai watched Xueqi walk into their house before he drove back to his manor. Superior A-grade beef was actually not just superior A-grade beef. It was more of a noble attitude. Those who could afford to eat this kind of food were all rich people. It was more of a symbol of status than the price of the ingredients themselves. For example, even if this premium snowflake beef was sold for $400 a pound, would the people in the United States not be able to afford it? They definitely could not afford to eat it every day. But what about a month or a year? They would definitely be willing to pay for it. The problem was that this type of beef was priceless. It could not be bought on the market. The beef sold in the largest supermarket was only of the best quality. There wasn't even a special selection, let alone a special quality one. If the supermarkets did not have it, one could not expect to find it in the market. There was only one source of this type of beef. It was a premium Western restaurant. Normally, this type of beef would cost more than $300. $400 was less than £1. However, if one went to a Western restaurant, the price would be terrifying. Moreover, one would not just order a plate of steak at a Western restaurant. The cheapest 3-course set meal with premium A snowflake beef as the main course would cost $998. If one person ate $998, 2 people would cost at least $2,000. Not many people would be willing to eat this kind of food. However, for Jiang Hai, this meat was just meat. Other people's cows were carefully raised and their marbled meat would not yield more than 5% of the meat. However, Jiang Hai's cows could yield 10% of the meat. This was what it meant to be a cow with 13 points. Although he had to bleed himself every time, Jiang Hai felt that it was worth it. The scales are almost full. I hope I won't need to bleed again in the next level. After returning home, Jiang Hai took a shower and looked at the python tattoo on his body in the mirror. At this time, the scales on the python's body were almost fully grown. After all, Jiang Hai did not bleed during the winter. 8 scales were growing every day, so the scales on his python were almost fully grown. Now, only a small part of the tail was left. He did not know what would happen after the evolution, but Jiang Hai was still looking forward to it. The next morning, Jiang Hai woke up and went out for a run. Then, he went out to sea with Robins and the others. Naturally, Jiang Hai didn't recruit these sailors to feed the uncles. They needed to work. Jiang Hai's order for the sea bath seeds should be delivered in the middle of January, which is around the 15th or 16th. Before these seeds were released, Jiang Hai needed to catch most of the fish in the area where he wanted to raise fish and sell them. This was to give space for the fish raised later. After all, the fish here were too mixed. Some of them were valuable and some were not. After fishing them up, it was not necessarily profitable. Secondly, if these fish were not caught, the seeds of the sea bath would become their food. The seeds of the sea bath were actually secondary. After all, they were not expensive. But if Jiang Hai's fry became their food, then Jiang Hai would cry. Of course, it was not to catch all the fish in this sea area. Jiang Hai was not going to catch any fish near the coastal coral reefs because the fish near the coral reefs had their own set of food chains. Jiang Hai did not need to worry about them. More importantly, many of these fish relied on the coral reefs to survive, such as some low-level bream, shrimps, crabs, and so on. It was precisely because of the existence of these prey that some predatory fish would not leave this area. Jiang Hai did not need to worry that these fish would affect Jiang Hai's fish farm. As for the fish in the sea outside, Jiang Hai did not plan to catch all of them. He only wanted to catch 80% of them. Even if he ate the rest, he would not be able to eat much. But even if it was 80%, it was still a small amount. According to Robin's measurements, the total number of fish in Jiang Hai's fishery might be worth tens of millions of dollars. Of course, if Jiang Hai didn't touch the corals now, it would be at least $4 million less. But there were $6 million worth of fish left. Even if it was 80%, it was still $8 million worth of fish. There were a lot of fish. Just like a few days ago, when Jiang Hai went out to sea, A large number of fish were found at the bottom of the sea in less than half an hour. What else was there to say? Let's start fishing. With a new helper, Philip didn't need to come and cause trouble. These old fishermen were much faster than Zhang Hai and Philip. In less than half an hour, they had already finished sorting the fish that weighed several tons. The only thing Zhang Hai needed to do as the boss was to count the kilograms of high-quality fish, ordinary fish, and things like shrimps and crabs. However, some of these shrimps and crabs would not be sold, because Zhang Hai liked to eat them. Perhaps some people would say that this was not good. They would have to be sold. Wasn't Zhang Hai in need of money now? Every penny should be split into two halves. However, the so-called lack of money was just that. At the very least, Zhang Hai would not mistreat himself in terms of living. Besides, he believed that his money would come back sooner or later. As long as he paid the first year's taxes, Zhang Hai believed that his cow would give him a satisfactory answer for the second year's taxes. Today, the fishing boat went out for a spin. In half a day, the 4 warehouses of the fishing boat were filled with fish. Zhang Hai was forced to go to the fisherman's place. The 4 warehouses of fish earned Zhang Hai $60,000. In the afternoon, he went to fish a few more nets. Before the market closed at night, Zhang Hai's 4 cabins were full again, and he sold them for another $65,000. His daily income was $125,000. After deducting the cost of diesel and lunch, Zhang Hai's net income was about $100,000. Of course, the fish were originally his, but he had to give them a bonus. After all, this was Zhang Hai's first time working with these sailors, so he gave them a generous bonus. He gave them a bonus of $10,000, which was equivalent to 10% of the net income. Divided equally among the 5 fishermen, each of them received $2,000. The fishermen were overjoyed. Not only were Eleanor Lucy and Andrew Christian so happy that their mouths were about to form a circle, but even Tommy Charles and Marlon Rupert were very happy. Although they were white, it was the first time they had seen a boss who gave out money so readily. At the same time, they had more confidence in Zhang Hai. When Zhang Hai's fishing boat returned to the port, the fishermen delivered some of the seafood that Zhang Hai deliberately left behind to Zhang Hai's home, and then dispersed. But just as these people left, while Zhang Hai was still dealing with these things, someone outside the door rang the doorbell. Zhang Hai went to take a look. It was none other than his chief lawyer, Moses Adams. Mr. Zhang Hai, I brought the preliminary handling of last night's incident. Hearing Zhang Hai's voice, Moses Adams, who was standing outside the door, immediately said with a smile. He knew that these rich people had bad tempers, and it was unacceptable that their private lawyers were not there when they were in trouble. After all, they had to pay. So when Moses Adams learned that Zhang Hai was looking for him, he flew over overnight. After sleeping on the plane, he began to deal with and ask about the process of Zhang Hai's incident. Although it was a little thrilling, it was relatively clear. So today, he had already brought the preliminary handling opinions. Of course, whether to deal with it or not was up to Zhang Hai. After all, he was only a lawyer, not the client. He could not make any decisions for the client. Come in. Although Zhang Hai was somewhat dissatisfied that this person was not there when he was in trouble yesterday, he still pressed the doorbell and let him in. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Moses Adams couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Then he drove into Zhang Hai's manor. After parking the car, he walked into Zhang Hai's villa with a file bag. But as soon as he entered the villa, he smelled a fishy smell. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang flash out from the side in an instant, looking at him with a wary face. As long as he dared to take a step forward, the eyes of the 2 big dogs instantly changed from wary to threatening. And looking at their eyes, Moses Adams was sure that if he dared to take a step forward, they would pounce on him. Looking at the 2 dogs that were bigger than wolves, Moses Adams subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Mr. Zhang Hai, I'm here. After thinking about it, Moses Adams wisely chose not to move, but shouted into the villa. Hearing his shout, after about a minute or so, Zhang Hai walked out of the warehouse in the distance with his clothes on. When he saw him, Zhang Hai's face showed a hint of surprise. You're here. Hey, these 2 guys won't let outsiders in before they get the order. Xiao Bai, Xiao Huang, go back to your nest. Looking at Moses Adams, Zhang Hai chuckled and said to him, then motioned to Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang to leave. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Moses Adams couldn't help but flash a bitter smile. How could he not know that this was Zhang Hai's way of putting him in his place? Just now, the door was opened by Zhang Hai, and now Zhang Hai said that he didn't know he was here. How is that possible? This was Zhang Hai expressing his dissatisfaction that he didn't come immediately after he called him yesterday. It's understandable. If it were me, I would probably be very dissatisfied too. Boss, I don't want to explain too much, but I brought you a gift. Look. Chapter 139. What? Hearing his words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile. It seemed that Moses Adams was a person who understood people's hearts very well. To put it bluntly, Zhang Hai was a person with a tough mouth but a soft heart. In fact, more often than not, as long as he gave in and paid a price, he could get away with it. After all, he was just a nouveau riche, not a noble who valued face more than anything else. Now that he heard that Moses Adams had brought him something, he looked at it curiously. Here. Seeing Zhang Hai's expression, Moses Adams also showed a kind smile. He knew that he had passed this time. Then he handed Zhang Hai an envelope. Zhang Hai took the envelope and glanced at it. He knew what was inside. It should be the tickets for the 2015 NBA All-Star Game because the outside of the envelope was printed with the promotional poster for the 2015 NBA All-Star Game. Although he already guessed what was inside, Zhang Hai was still very happy to open the envelope. After opening the envelope, he found a magnetic card inside. This is the NBA All-Star Game ticket package. It includes the open practice for the All-Star Game on the 13th, the Masters Game and Rookie Challenge on the 14th, the All-Star Weekend Challenge on the 15th, the Development League All-Star Game on the 16th, the concert before the All-Star Game, and all the tickets for the All-Star Game. My seat is in the first row of the Eastern All-Star Game. If it wasn't held in New York this time, I wouldn't have been able to get such a good seat, but it really took a lot of effort to get it. Looking at Zhang Hai, Moses Adams said with a smile. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai curled his lips. He knew that Moya Adams was exaggerating, but he really liked this thing. I won't pretend that yesterday didn't happen. Next time, Mr. Adams, if I can't find you and have to wait 23 hours before I see you, then you can say goodbye to my dollar forever. Although this gift was very thoughtful, Zhang Hai still decided to give him a warning and let him know that he was not a pushover. That's what I should do. It was my mistake this time. Moses Adams quickly nodded when he heard that Zhang Hai had decided to turn the page. Sometimes, it wasn't a big deal to admit a mistake. After all, nobody would make life difficult for a green dollar. Tell me about this incident. Leaning back on the sofa, Zhang Hai asked Moses Adams. Looking at Zhang Hai, Moses Adams slowly said, "This time, to be honest, you won't get any benefits, because these people really don't have anything." The nature of this incident was determined very quickly. It was very clear that Zhang Hai had been attacked. The police had indeed found Xueqi's wallet on the thief's body, and they had also found the fingerprints of these people on the switchblade on the floor. Moreover, it wasn't the first time these people had done something like this. Although they were really pitiful, as Zhang Hai said, this wasn't the reason for their crimes. These people were basically people with physical disabilities. America's society was essentially a capitalist society. Therefore, although there were some welfare organizations that would accept such people, their lives in the welfare organizations were not very good. After all, it cost a lot of money to raise a person, and everything in a capitalist society required money. Even the air they breathed had to be taxed. Under such circumstances, it would be strange if their lives were good. So, from a young age, they learned the law of the jungle in the welfare agency. The stronger, the more ruthless, they could eat more. The thin and weak, if they didn't do anything, they couldn't even fill their stomachs. Moreover, the most important thing was that the welfare agency couldn't take care of them for a lifetime. When they reached adulthood, the welfare agency would ask them to do some things, and they would accept the food and accommodation provided by the welfare agency in return. Many people couldn't accept this, and they were more willing to leave the welfare agency. But when they were young, they put more energy into how to fill their stomachs. In addition to their congenital deficiencies, it was difficult for them to find a job after entering society, and they didn't have a clear position. Over time, in these big cities, they were led astray by society and formed their own culture. When the men grew up, they became thieves and robbers. Of course, their main business was pimping. When the women grew up, they had no other choice but to sell their bodies to make a living. Speaking of which, this was a group of pitiful people. Even Jiang Hai felt quite uncomfortable when he heard it. He felt like he wasn't a good person, but when this feeling rose, Jiang Hai shook his head. What kind of Virgin Mary plot was the most unacceptable? Forget it, I won't sue them. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai shook his head and let these guys go. My boss is really a kind guy. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moshe Adams also said with a smile. Well, some people with criminal cases will be locked up, and some who didn't commit any crimes will be educated in the police station for a few days at most, and then sent back to the welfare agency. They may also be dismissed on the spot. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moshe Adams thought for a while. According to the local laws of Boston, the situation was basically like this. After listening to Moshe Adams's words, Jiang Hai asked carefully. This time, a total of 36 people were caught in the den. 13 of the men, the 13 people who were killed by Jiang Hai, had crimes on them. Robbery, car theft, they all had criminal records. This time they were in prison. It was estimated that they wouldn't be able to come out for a few years. There were also 23 women. Basically, they would not be punished too severely. It was the same as the law in Huaxia. Being a special service person did not constitute a crime. After the general den in China was raided, except for the organizer who would be sentenced, the people below would not be sentenced. At most, they would be locked up for 15 days and pay a fine of 5,000 yuan. The situation in the United States was similar. At most, they would be dismissed from the state. If you want to do it, you can go to other states to do it. After all, there were many states in the United States that were very open to this kind of thing and had licenses. However, after Jiang Hai heard this, he was a little uncomfortable. It was not that he thought the punishment was light. It was because he felt that if these people were released, they would probably do what they originally did. After all, they had no other way to survive. Those men dared to attack him, so he just ignored them. However, those women were a little pitiful. He remembered how bad the environment was after he chased them to the alley yesterday. Those women's eyes were so numb and lifeless when they looked at him. If he didn't know about this, it would be just that. But now that he knew, he still felt a little sorry if he didn't do anything. But what can he do? He didn't know himself, but fortunately, there were still 15 days to think about it. Those women are going to be locked up for 15 days, right? Looking at Moses Adams, Jiang Hai asked him. 21 of them are, but there are 2 twin sisters. They may not be, because the elder sister is the one who stole your wallet. It seems that there are no other cases except for this case. The younger sister has no criminal record, so the police are now waiting for your answer. If you want to pursue the matter, you will arrest the elder sister. If you don't pursue the matter, they may be released directly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams thought for a moment and said, Sisters? Let's go and have a look. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's brows couldn't help but raise. He didn't expect that the thief he caught yesterday turned out to be a girl. Thinking about how he felt when he searched the wallet yesterday, but the girl was really too thin, almost like a bag of bones. Jiang Hai almost searched her upper body, but he didn't find that she was a woman. Suddenly, Jiang Hai wanted to see these people, because he still couldn't make up his mind about what to do. Okay. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams on the other side immediately responded. After Jiang Hai changed his clothes and suppressed the fishy smell, the 2 drove into the city of Boston, one in front and one behind. Soon they came to the police station where Jiang Hai came yesterday. Originally, he was very reluctant to come back, but now he had something on his mind, so he didn't think much and went straight in. Fortunately, the police here still remembered him. After hearing Moses Adams explain Jiang Hai's intention, they took Jiang Hai to the small cell in the police station. Although this was not a detention center, after all, the prisoners were caught in the police station. It was impossible to let the prisoners run around in the police station, especially a large number of prisoners. They still needed a place to temporarily hold them, and it was such a small cell. However, this small cell was much better than the cells in the prison. At least, they would not be treated unfairly. When Jiang Hai walked in, 3 of the 6 cells were full. One of them was holding the 13 people defeated by Jiang Hai yesterday. Some of them needed treatment and were still in the hospital. The rest didn't need treatment or had already been treated. When Jiang Hai came in, these people raised their heads and looked at Jiang Hai. But at this time, there was only resentment and a strong murderous intent in their eyes. After all, it was because of this man that they didn't get the money, were caught, and were beaten. If eyes could kill, Jiang Hai would have died thousands of times. Originally, Jiang Hai still had some pity for these people, but when he saw the eyes of these men, Jiang Hai's heart calmed down. He knew that these people were no different from normal prisoners. Maybe their starting point was different, but the result was the same. Even if he used his connections to release these people now, these people would not be grateful in their hearts. Instead, they would look for opportunities to retaliate against him, or go out and resume their old business, causing more innocent people to suffer. They were not wronged at all. Chapter 140. Clang. Just as Jiang Hai walked past the male prisoner's cell, a girl suddenly jumped out of another cell next to it. The girl's hands slammed heavily on the iron bars of the cell. The loud noise also attracted Jiang Hai's attention. The girl looked about 1.6 meters tall, with short brown hair and a small face, about the size of a palm. Her light blue eyes were very beautiful, but from the shape of her face, it could be seen that she was too thin. At the same time, the clothes she was wearing were also somewhat familiar to Jiang Hai. If there was no accident, this girl should be the thief he caught. After seeing Jiang Hai looking over, the girl quickly used her hands to say something to Jiang Hai. But unfortunately, Jiang Hai didn't learn sign language, so he didn't know what the girl was saying. I don't understand what you mean. Seeing the girl getting more and more excited, Jiang Hai said helplessly. She said that she knows she was wrong. She is willing to atone for her mistakes, but please save her sister. She didn't do anything bad. At this time, the policeman who led Jiang Hai and the others in said slowly, "You can read sign language?" Hearing the policeman's words, Jiang Hai asked him strangely, "I used to be a volunteer." Seeing Jiang Hai so surprised, the fat policeman shrugged and said softly. Hearing the fat policeman's words, Jiang Hai turned his head and looked at the two cells in front of him. In these two cells, the girls were imprisoned. Different from the original alley, their clothes were cleaner. On each of their delicate faces, there was a pale and numb expression. Except for this girl and a girl standing not far behind her, who looked very similar to her, no one had any emotional fluctuations because of Jiang Hai's arrival. Perhaps for them, being alive might be more liberating than being dead, but human nature made them still struggle to live in this evil world. Jiang Hai was just one of the passers-by in their lives and didn't mean anything. "Sigh, I originally didn't want to do anything to you. Those fellows deserve to be punished. As for you, you are all pitiful people. I came back this time to ask you, what are your plans after you come out?" Seeing the expressions on these people's faces, Jiang Hai felt as if his heart had been punched. What kind of experience did they have to go through to have such despair? Jiang Hai used to think that when his parents left, he was the loneliest and most pitiful person in the world, but suddenly, he found that his most difficult days seemed to be far from the daily lives of these people. Although he was not a saint, at this moment, he hesitated and scratched his head. It seemed that he was regarded as a villain. However, it didn't matter if he was a villain, as long as he didn't do anything that made him unhappy. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl, who was still gesturing quickly, couldn't help but stop for a moment. Then, she looked at Jiang Hai with some hesitation. Future? For them, the word future was illusory and unrealistic. How could they be qualified to talk about the future? Because they didn't know what would happen today. Would they starve to death? Would they be killed by others? Towards this world, this society, now they had almost fallen into despair. Perhaps their lives would be like this, day by day. They would be locked up here for 15 days, and then when they were released, they would go back to their old jobs. After all, this was the only thing they knew. Now that they heard Jiang Hai's words, the girls here were a little confused. "Listen, if I want to help you, then do you want to go back to the orphanage, find a job, or don't need me to care about you?" Looking at the women in front of him, to be exact, they were girls because these women were not very old. Jiang Hai had read their information before coming in. Among these women, the oldest was only 22 years old, but she had already lived there for 6 years. That kind of environment would have a great impact on people's lifespan. The oldest in this group was the leader of the 13 men. He was also a deaf and mute person. He was 31 years old this year. Although he wasn't very old, he had already lived in that place for 17 years. Before these people, there were many groups of people in that place, but it was very difficult for them to live past 25 years old. Among these women, the oldest was 22 years old, and the youngest was only 14 years old. They were the twins. Maybe it was because the twin sister was a thief, or maybe it was because they were still young, so they hadn't sold their bodies yet. However, this was only temporary. In a few years, they would also follow this old path. Now that they suddenly heard Zhang Hai's words, the people here were stunned. Many of them couldn't help but raise their heads and look at Zhang Hai. They wanted to know whether Zhang Hai was telling the truth or not. This could be seen from their eyes. "Boss, are you serious?" When these women raised their heads and looked at Zhang Hai, Moses, Adams, who was behind Zhang Hai, also stood up and asked hesitantly. After all, these women's identities were not so clean. "Well, I'm serious. In my manor, there is a winery that will start planting grapes this year. I think they will be good winemakers." Hearing Moses Adams' words, Zhang Hai shrugged. Originally, he didn't decide whether to help these people or not, but when he saw the numbness of these people, he decided to lend a helping hand. "If that's the case, I won't say much. Boss, although I'm very grateful to you, it's easy to hire them, but it's not so easy to change them. But there is also an advantage, which is that they can help you avoid taxes." Hearing that Zhang Hai even arranged a place for them, Moses, Adams couldn't help but hesitate for a moment, then sighed and said, "It's not easy to change them. It's quite troublesome." One must know that these women's identities are very special. Ordinary manners want to hire them only to avoid taxes, and hiring 1 or 2 is enough. But how many does Zhang Hai want to hire? He believed that if Zhang Hai said this sentence, at least 10 of these women would be willing to work. 10 deaf and mute girls, and deaf and mute girls who used to be professional women. By then, it would be more than just a little troublesome. It's estimated that those welfare agencies and the like would run to Zhang Hai every 2 or 3 days. To see if they were abused, to see if they were not allowed to eat well, to dress well, to see if the work was heavy, to see if they were discriminated against, to see if they would make some unreasonable requests, etc. When these people were about to starve, no one was willing to pay attention to them, but when someone stretched out a helping hand, there were often some defenders who would stand up and nitpick at the bones in an egg. "I don't care about that. I just want to help you. Let me tell you, although this matter is more or less related to you, I don't want to mention it again. Now, I'll help to provide a position in the winery. I'm not very clear about the specific work, because I don't know how to make wine, but I guess you'll just have to take care of the grapes and pick them after the season. I won't give you a small amount of money because of your relationship with the people outside. Money is equal to the people outside. Food, accommodation, and food will be beef and fish, because there are also cattle and fish in my manor. The place you will live in will be a standalone villa, but you may need to squeeze in and sleep in the villa. If you don't want to, and want to go back to the orphanage, I will ask someone to send you back. If you don't need my help, I can also bail you out, but once you're out of the door, it has nothing to do with me." Looking at these women in front of him, Zhang Hai said seriously. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, some people who were still doubtful, or even completely numb, suddenly became interested in Zhang Hai's proposal. Of course, there were still many people who were still numb, such as the oldest woman. At this time, she was still looking at the roof, without a trace of anger. If it weren't for the fact that her chest was still moving up and down, proving that she was still alive, she would be no different from a corpse. Obviously, this woman had no hope for life at this time. This was not something that Zhang Hai could change with a few words. "All right, let's bail them all out." The words that needed to be said had been said, and Zhang Hai did not want to say any more nonsense. He had already done his duty. After getting up, he said to Moses Adams, "Let's go." In response to Zhang Hai's words, Moses Adams shrugged, although he did not think that Zhang Hai had made a clear choice. But Zhang Hai was the boss, and he had the final say. These women did not have any criminal records, so they only needed to pay some money and they could leave. Although Zhang Hai lacked money, he did not lack this. The 23 women were sold for a total of $11,000. That was equivalent to $500 per person, and the twin sister who did not commit any crime did not need to pay. When all the formalities were done, Zhang Hai also left the police station with the 23 women. When they left, the 13 men on the other side kept reaching out, wanting to grab Zhang Hai or begging him to take them away. Unfortunately, Zhang Hai did not even look at them. After leaving the police station, 8 of the 23 women left alone. This was what Zhang Hai said. He would not restrict their freedom. They did not believe in Zhang Hai, and it could be said that they did not believe in the society in this world. So when they left, Zhang Hai did not try to persuade them to stay. This was not something that could be changed with just a few words. There were 15 women left, including the twins. Those under the age of 18 should go back to the orphanage. If you don't want to go back to your original orphanage, Adams will help them contact the orphanage in Boston. I will pay for the intermediate costs. Looking at the remaining 15 people, Zhang Hai hesitated and said, Chapter 141. As soon as they heard that they were going to be sent back to the orphanage, several of the remaining girls began to shake their heads immediately. Looking at their frightened faces, Zhang Hai was a little confused. What's going on? Unfortunately, he couldn't understand what the girls were gesturing, so after hesitating for a while, he went to the police station and caught the fat policeman. He asked him to act as a translator. After the policeman saw the girls' gestures, he explained to Zhang Hai. They said that they don't want to go back to the orphanage. They are not happy there. They don't have enough to eat every day. Who the hell, those damn orphanages? Under the policeman's explanation, Zhang Hai slowly understood. In fact, although it was called an orphanage, this thing was really not as beautiful as the movies and TV dramas. Although the orphanage was not for profit, they also needed to spend money. The food they ate was not grown by the wind. The water they used also needed money. The electricity they used also needed money. Quilts, beds, and other things also needed money. Even if the government had subsidies, it was just a drop in the bucket. Therefore, under such circumstances, the children in the orphanage were actually not very good. Some of the younger children were still fine. Other than reading the Bible every day and not having enough to eat, they basically did not need to do any physical work. As for what to eat, there was no need to think about it. Basically, the food they ate every day was mainly mud of various vegetables. It was good enough to not starve to death. The older children not only had to read the Bible every day, but also had to use their own hands to exchange for food because they ate more. It was natural for them to do odd jobs in the orphanage, so there was no need to say much about it. In addition, they also needed to make some small biscuits, small food, and so on. They went to the parking lots, squares, or outside their homes in the rich district to sell these things. The money they sold back did not belong to them, but they had to hand it over. At the same time, everyone had their own business target every month. If they didn't achieve it, although they wouldn't be punished, they would have to eat less and be locked up in a small dark room. It was a common occurrence. Normal welfare institutions were like this. Not to mention the abnormal welfare institute these children were staying in. In such a welfare institute, people were more violent and irritated. Otherwise, they would not be willing to leave a place where they could at least sleep. Now that they heard that Zhang Hai wanted to send them back, they quickly shook their heads. They didn't want to go back. I can't do anything if you don't want to go back. I can't hire underage people to come to my manor. It's against the law. Although Zhang Hai was not afraid of the law, it did not mean that he would take the initiative to break the law. No matter where he was, hiring child labor was going to jail. Upon hearing Zhang Hai's words, the girls stopped and lowered their heads helplessly. Among the 15 girls, the oldest was 21 years old, and the youngest was the pair of 14-year-old twins. 8 of them were over 18 years old, and 7 of them were underage. 3 of them were 17 years old, 2 of them were 16 years old, and this pair of 14-year-old twins. How about this? You go back to the Welfare Institute first. When you are 18 years old, you can come to me again. I will definitely hire you. Looking at the girls' gloomy expressions, Zhang Hai scratched his head and promised the girls. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the 5 older girls among the girls looked at each other, hesitated, and nodded weakly. Seeing that the girls agreed, Zhang Hai was relieved. He immediately called Adams to open a hotel nearby for the girls. Then he contacted the best orphanage in the Boston area. Tomorrow, the 7 girls will be sent to the orphanage. However, after entering the hotel, Zhang Hai booked a room for them and was about to leave. However, these girls would not let Zhang Hai leave. After all, their lives had just been rekindled with a glimmer of hope. If Zhang Hai left like this, what would they do? How would they know if Zhang Hai was lying to them? Looking at these girls who blocked his way and frantically said something in sign language. Although Zhang Hai did not understand, he knew what they meant. In the end, Zhang Hai had no choice but to open a room in the hotel. "Boss, I have to admit that you are a kind-hearted rich man. In fact, in my opinion, even if you are merciful, you can just give them some money." Because he still needs to call the Boston Welfare Institute tonight and sign a labor contract with Zhang Hai tomorrow. These girls are not ordinary people. The labor agreement they sign is not as simple as Robin's. These girls are still quite troublesome. Especially when Zhang Hai hires so many girls at once, it is even more troublesome. Give a man a fish, and you feed him for a day. Hey, you don't understand. Do they lack money in that line of work? What they need now is not money, but they need to really integrate into this world and become a member of the society. What they need is respect and a job, not just some money that will be spent. Hey, you don't understand. Have you contacted the Welfare Institute? Hearing Moses Adams's words, Zhang Hai gave him a blank look and said with a serious face. Almost done. We have already contacted 3 families. They can accept 5 people, but there are still 2 people who are a bit troublesome. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Moses Adams said with a serious face. Contact them even if it's troublesome. Hearing what he said, Zhang Hai snorted. Why bother looking for a lawyer? With such a sentence, Zhang Hai went to his room first, and Moses Adams also smiled bitterly. If it weren't for Zhang Hai being a high-quality client, he wouldn't have served him. It's too troublesome. For the first time, he heard that a lawyer had to arrange a welfare institute for some orphans. He really didn't take him seriously as a lawyer. But considering that Zhang Hai gave him a lawyer's fee based on time, he sighed again. As long as Zhang Hai gives him money, even if he asks him to pay for him to find a special service person, he has to accompany him, right? So he just shook his head and entered another room opened by Zhang Hai. Because Zhang Hai wanted to save trouble, he booked a room on the first floor of the hotel. 15 girls plus 2 men, 1 room for each. He doesn't need this money. Anyway, it's just 1 night. It doesn't matter. After Zhang Hai entered the room, he sat on the sofa in the room, turned on the TV, and flipped through the hotel's TV program in boredom. For him, he actually didn't care much about the past of these girls, or the future, or what happened to them. The reason why he did this today was because he didn't want to waste time talking about it. At the same time, it was also because he really had a hidden heart. But what will happen in the future, he didn't want to think about it at the moment, and he wasn't prepared to think about it. If these girls don't work hard, then he will dismiss them without any hesitation. But others don't know. Zhang Hai's sixth sense tells him that these new girls will work hard. What happened later also confirmed Zhang Hai's conjecture. These girls really cherish the opportunity when they have it. Bang bang bang. Just as Zhang Hai was thinking about it, there was a knock on the door. When Zhang Hai heard the knock on the door, he couldn't help but be stunned. Who would knock on his people in the middle of the night? Out of curiosity, he walked to the door and opened it. But when he opened it, he was stunned because the person who knocked on his door was none other than the 14-year-old sister, the girl who stole Xueqi Clive's wallet. Oh, what's the matter? Looking at the girl in front of him, Zhang Hai looked at her strangely and asked, "Ah." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the girl began to gesture. She also knew that Zhang Hai couldn't understand sign language, so her gestures were very slow. Sign language, in fact, is a kind of symbolic memory of movements. It is mainly based on association. After Zhang Hai looked at it a few times, he probably guessed it. The girl's words were, "Please don't let them leave." The them he was referring to, if nothing unexpected happened, should be her and her younger sister. Why don't you want to go to the Welfare Institute? Yes, the life there may not be good, but I contacted the best welfare institute here. It should be better than the one you stayed in before. Chapter 142. Adopt your ass. Which country's law allows a 27-year-old single man to adopt two 14-year-old deaf and mute girls? Hearing Moses, Adams's words, Zhang Hai almost went berserk. If he had salt soda next to him, he would probably spray Moses, Adams to death. What kind of idea is this, adopt? Not to mention whether he agrees or not, the law of the United States will not allow it. He now has some doubts about whether Moses, Adams is a lawyer or not. Hearing Moses Adams's words, the girl who thought it was impossible, couldn't help but raise her head, her eyes full of hope, but when Zhang Hai saw this glimmer of hope, he was a little speechless. If the truth is really as simple as he said, but the problem is, things are not as simple as he said. Zhang Hai doesn't believe that this guy doesn't know what he knows. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the girl's eyes showed a trace of frustration. She bit her lip gently and didn't speak. She just stared at Zhang Hai with her big eyes, hoping that this matter can still be turned around. No, Mr. Zhang, you got two things wrong. First, you are not single, you are already married. Second, you are a rich man. This may be a bit troublesome for others, but for you, it is not very troublesome. Looking at Zhang Hai, Moses, Adam said with a smile, but looking at his smile, Zhang Hai wanted to beat him so much. I am single, I am divorced. Looking at Moses, Adams, Zhang Hai said very clearly. No, you are not, well, even if you are divorced, why don't you go back first, and then inform the people from the welfare agency to come and deal with this matter? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Moses, Adams was about to say something, but he quickly shut up. He also knew that he said too much. Zhang Hai is obviously unwilling to adopt this pair of sisters, so he seems to have done something wrong with his good intentions. If it was before, he would have woken up long ago. But there is no other way. He hasn't slept for nearly 48 hours. Yesterday morning, he was still in Miami and only took a nap on the plane. Today, he has been running for Zhang Hai, a big client. Now his brain really can't keep up. If it doesn't work, I can only do this. Kid, you heard it. In fact, I am not qualified to let you stay, but if you really don't want to go to the welfare agency, then wait for the people from the welfare agency to come, then you can talk to them. Looking at the girl beside him, Zhang Hai said slowly. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the girl hesitated for a moment. She knew that no matter what she did now, Zhang Hai would not change his mind. The only way to stay here is to find away from the people from the welfare agency. Thinking of this, she nodded, then bowed to Zhang Hai and returned to her room. When she returned to her room, her sister had been waiting for her in the room for a long time. As soon as she saw her sister coming back, she immediately rushed over and began to gesture with her hand language. Unfortunately, she didn't get the information she wanted to know from her sister. Then, she pouted helplessly and sat back on the bed listlessly. They really didn't want to go back to the welfare agency. For them, living there was really similar to staying in prison. Not to mention freedom, it was difficult to even eat and not be bullied. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to escape from there. For them, the only thing they wanted now was to find a warm place where they could eat. Originally, Zhang Hai's place would be as beautiful as heaven, but unfortunately, Zhang Hai didn't seem to let them go. Don't worry, I will find a way. Looking at her sister's sad look, a trace of reluctance flashed in the eyes of the older sister. Although they were born only a few minutes apart, she, as the older sister who came to the world first, must find a way to take care of her younger sister. Then, she began to gesture with her younger sister. You bastard, are you trying to kill me? Also, you said that I'm not divorced. What do you mean? I'm clearly divorced. After the girl left, Zhang Hai couldn't help but punch Moses, Adams. He couldn't help but grimace, but he didn't complain or fight back. After all, he still wanted to keep Zhang Hai as a client, and most importantly, he did say something wrong just now. Sir, I just checked your information. You are registered to be married in Xueqi. Moses, Adam said with a grin while rubbing his shoulder. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai frowned. He couldn't figure it out. Sir, you're not an immigrant, but an investment green card, so the immigration office doesn't care if you're married or not. You can fill in whatever you want. Moses, Adam shrugged, probably seeing Zhang Hai's doubts. Obviously, the people in the immigration office wouldn't say no to a client who wanted to invest hundreds of millions of dollars. They wouldn't say no to a client who wanted to invest hundreds of millions of dollars, let alone a non-immigrant. Even if it was a real immigrant, they wouldn't say much. Giving 2 nationalities in exchange for hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, and also solving the problem of more than a dozen jobs. Most importantly, there was nothing more cost-effective than increasing local taxes. King U.S. Empress. Hearing Moses Adams' words, Zhang Hai cursed secretly. At the same time, he thought that he should have been divorced. After all, after the last phone call, he said so harshly. Qili wouldn't tolerate it anymore. But now, he wasn't divorced. What was going on? What is Qili going to do? Muttering in a low voice, Zhang Hai walked into the room with a suspicious attitude. As for Moses Adams, he breathed a sigh of relief. Zhang Hai didn't mention his mistake just now, so he escaped. But what does this guy mean? Does he want to keep the 2 girls or not? Looking at Zhang Hai's closed door, Moses Adams touched his chin helplessly because he really couldn't see through Zhang Hai. In fact, he wasn't the only one who couldn't see through Zhang Hai. Achoo! At this time in the capital of Huaxia, on the top floor of a commercial office building in the CBD, Qili, who was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looking at the foggy capital at this time, couldn't help but sneeze. Then she rubbed her nose with some distress, walked to her desk, picked up the mink coat on the back of the chair, and put it on casually. She tightened her clothes, walked to the window again, and looked out of the window where she couldn't see anything. In fact, the prosperity of a country was inseparable from industrial development, and as long as industrial development was inseparable from pollution. At present, China had always been determined to develop a strong national strength, so it was inevitable that they didn't pay too much attention to environmental protection and the like. Zhang Hai still remembered that when he went to the capital when he was young, he could still see the blue sky. In his hometown, Ice City, the blue sky was also the main theme of life, but he didn't know when the haze began to become the main theme of this world. It was fine in summer, but in winter, after central heating began, it was difficult to see clearly in the northern land beyond 5 meters. It was only when it snowed occasionally that these dirty things could be seen clearly. To be honest, although such an environment caused a lot of trouble for people, the industrial development of a country was always inseparable from these things. What was called developing China? It was a country that had always been developing. What was called a developed country? It was a country that had stopped developing and reached a balance. If it continued to develop, there wouldn't be much effect. Only then would it be called a developed country. A few decades ago, the United States environment was even worse than China's. Sewage flowed everywhere, and the air pollution index was off the charts. But after World War II, they had always been the world's leader. Their development quickly left other countries behind by a few, or even dozens of streets. After they had enough advantages, they began to patiently manage it. The current environment in the United States wasn't as beautiful as a painting, but at least in terms of air quality, it was definitely much better than China's. It couldn't be compared to some deep mountains and forests. Just comparing the air quality in the cities was indeed much better than China's. And in some rural areas, the air quality was even better. Of course, this had nothing to do with Qili at this time. Although she stood in front of the window, she could only vaguely see the outline of some buildings in the distance. She stood here not to look at the scenery or to get some fresh air, but to think about something. She was thinking about this morning's call from her mother, asking her if she was going back for the new year. After all, it was already the middle of January. There was less than a month left before the new year. Whether she was going back for the new year was naturally the most important thing for every parent. Now, Qili's mother was the only one left. If she said that she didn't go back, she would feel uncomfortable in her heart. After all, it was the new year. She also hoped that she could stay at home. But if she wanted to go back, Zhang Hai was destined not to go back with her. How was she going to explain it? Tell the truth, or what? But how was she going to say this? It had been half a year since Zhang Hai left the country. In this half a year, she didn't know why, but she had been hiding the news that Zhang Hai was not in the country. But now that the new year was coming, she couldn't hide it anymore. What should she do? This damn guy really knows how to give me problems. Qili slammed the window in front of her hard. But unfortunately, no matter how hard she clenched her teeth, Zhang Hai couldn't hear her. President Qi, are you still going to the banquet tonight? At this moment, the office door opened a crack. Her assistant looked at Qili, who was in a bad mood, and asked carefully. Chi didn't answer. Instead, she turned around and left. Feelings were feelings, career was career. She was no longer the person who needed relationships to survive. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.